10 days before Thanksgiving, I found out that my daughter was planning to humiliate me in front of everyone and then kick me out of my own home, so I changed my plans. On November 27th, amidst the aroma of roasting turkey and expensive wine, my daughter called me in a panic and asked, "Where are you?" I laughed and told her to look in the top drawer of my nightstand. What she saw there made her scream so loud the neighbors probably called the police. This is a true story. I am Roosevelt Jefferson, 73 years old, and my hands are rougher than sandpaper. They are hands that have poured concrete-framed houses and built the skyline of Atlanta when this city was nothing but potential and red clay. But on that Tuesday afternoon, 10 days before the holiday that celebrates gratitude, those same hands were covered in black grease tightening a rusted pipe in the basement of a house I paid for, but where I lived like a ghost. Before I continue this story, please hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by the people you sacrificed everything for, and tell me in the comments where are you watching from. The basement was cold, smelling of mildew and damp earth. It was my designated space. Upstairs, the house was a showroom of modern furniture and beige carpets. But down here, it was just me and the furnace. I was on my back, sliding under the utility sink, trying to stop a leak that my son-in-law Blake had complained about that morning. He had snapped his fingers at me as he left for his job at the brokerage firm, saying, "Fix that drip, Rosie, it is keeping me awake." He never called me Dad, just Rosie, like I was hired help. I grunted as I turned the wrench. My joints ached with a dull, familiar throb, the kind of pain you earn after 40 years in construction. I wiped sweat from my forehead with my sleeve, leaving a streak of oil on my skin. I was just about to finish when I heard the heavy thud of the front door slamming shut upstairs, followed by the click-clack of Keisha's heels and the heavy tread of Blake's dress shoes. They were home early. I froze. Not out of fear, but out of habit. In this house, I had learned that invisibility was my best defense. The air vents in this old house were excellent conductors of sound-carrying voices from the living room directly down to where I lay on the concrete. I heard Blake's voice first. It was tight, high-pitched, the tone he used when he was trying to sound authoritative. "Keisha, we need to talk about the schedule for next week," he said. "My parents just confirmed their flight. They are arriving from Connecticut on Wednesday afternoon, a day early." I paused, holding my breath. I knew Blake's parents, the Vanderbilts. They were people who smiled with their teeth but never with their eyes. They looked at me as if I were a stain on the upholstery. "That is great, honey," Keisha replied, her voice sounding thin and anxious. "I will make sure the guest room is ready. I bought those Egyptian cotton sheets your mother likes." "No, Keisha." "You are not listening," Blake interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, becoming colder. "It is not about the sheets. It is about him." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the air out of the basement. I knew who him was. I gripped the wrench tighter. "What about my dad?" Keisha asked, though she sounded like she already knew the answer. "He cannot be here," Blake said, stating it as a fact, not a request. "Not when my parents are here. You know how my mother is. She is sensitive to odors and clutter. Having a senile old black man wandering around in his stained overalls mumbling to himself. It is not the image we want to project, Keisha. It brings down the value of everything we have built." I felt a sharp pain in my chest, sharper than any heart attack. Senile. Old. A stain on their image. I looked down at my overalls. They were stained because I was fixing his plumbing. They were dirty because I cleaned his gutters. "Blake, he lives here," Keisha whispered. "Where is he supposed to go?" "It is Thanksgiving." "I do not care where he goes," Blake snapped. "Put him in a hotel. Or better yet, it is time we stopped delaying the inevitable. You said you looked into that facility." Shady Pines. Shady Pines. The name hit me like a physical blow. Everyone in our neighborhood knew Shady Pines. It was a state-funded warehouse for the indigent elderly. It was a place where people went to stare at peeling wallpaper until they died. It smelled of urine and despair. It was the place you sent people you had thrown away. Blake. Shady Pines is... It is not a nice place, Keisha said, her voice trembling. "It is what we can afford for him right now," Blake countered. "Look, Keisha, my parents are coming to celebrate my promotion. They think we are doing better than we are. If they see him living in the basement like a troll shuffling around, it ruins the narrative. I need them to invest in my new fund. If they see we are taking care of a burden, they will think we are not focused. He has to go." permanently. I waited. I waited for my daughter, the girl I had raised, alone after my wife Beatrice passed, the girl whose college tuition I paid for by working double shifts pouring concrete in the Georgia heat to scream at him. I waited for her to say, "Get out of my house." I waited for her to say, "That man is my father and he owns this roof over your head." Instead, I heard a sigh. A long, defeated sigh. "Okay," Keisha said softly. "Okay. You are right. He is getting worse anyway. Yesterday, he forgot to put the coaster under his coffee mug." I closed my eyes. I had not forgotten. Blake had moved the coaster to make me think I was slipping. "I will make the arrangements," Keisha continued. "I will tell him he has a doctor's appointment on Monday. We can drop him off at Shady Pines for an evaluation and just leave him there. We will tell him it is temporary until the doctors clear him. By the time he realizes Thanksgiving will be over." "Excellent, Blake," said the tension leaving his voice. "You are making the right choice, babe. This is for us, for our future. Now come on, let's go get dinner. I don't want to be here when he crawls out of the basement." Their footsteps faded as they walked toward the kitchen, discussing wine pairings for the turkey. I lay there on the cold concrete floor, the wrench still in my hand. A single tear, hot and angry, rolled down my cheek and mixed with the grease on my face. They were not just kicking me out for the holiday. They were discarding me. They were planning to trick me, drive me to a hellhole, and abandon me there so they could impress some guests with a lie. I thought about the house. I bought this land 30 years ago. I framed the walls. I laid the hardwood floors they were walking on. I put the deed in my name, but I let them live here rent-free for 5 years because Blake said he needed to save capital. I had cooked their meals, fixed their cars, and made myself small so they could feel big. And this was my repayment. Shady Pines. I sat up slowly. My bones creaked, but my mind was suddenly clearer than it had been in years. The sadness began to evaporate, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. It was the same feeling I used to get before demolishing a condemned building. You check the structure, you plant the charges, and you bring it down fast. I reached into the pocket of my overalls and pulled out my phone. It was an old model, cracked screen, but the voice recorder worked perfectly. I had pressed record the moment I heard Blake's voice drop. I stopped the recording and saved the file. File name, Thanksgiving Plan. I stood up and walked to the cracked mirror hanging over the utility sink. I looked at the man reflected there. Gray hair, tired eyes, grease-stained cheeks. They saw a helpless old man. They saw a burden. They saw a resource that had been fully tapped out. They forgot that before I was a retiree, I was a foreman. I knew how to read a blueprint, and more importantly, I knew how to spot a structural failure. Keisha wanted to send me away. Fine, I would go, but I would not go to Shady Pines, and when I left, I would take the foundation of their lives with me. I turned on the faucet and began to scrub the grease from my hands with a bar of harsh yellow soap. I scrubbed until my skin was raw and red. I was washing away the dirt, but I was also washing away the last remnants of my mercy. I looked up at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of my daughter laughing at something her husband said. "Laugh while you can," I whispered to the empty basement. "Because in 10 days you are going to learn that you never truly know who you are dealing with until you push them too far." I dried my hands on a rag, picked up my toolbox, and walked toward the stairs. I had work to do, not plumbing, demolition. 9 days before Thanksgiving, the humiliation moved from the basement to the living room. The house was buzzing with activity because Blake had decided to host an early cocktail mixer for his colleagues at the brokerage firm. He called it a networking event, but I knew what it really was. It was a desperate attempt to project wealth he did not have to people who did not care. At 4 in the afternoon, while I was in the kitchen trying to make myself a sandwich, Blake walked in holding a bundle of white fabric. He threw it at my chest. It was a white service jacket, the kind waiters wear at old country clubs. It smelled of mothballs and dust. "Put this on Rosie," he commanded, checking his reflection in the microwave door. "One of the catering staff canceled last minute. I need you to pass the hors d'oeuvres and keep the wine glasses full." I looked at the jacket, then at him. "I am not a waiter, Blake," I said, keeping my voice low. "I am a retired contractor. I am your father-in-law." Blake turned to me, his eyes narrowing. "You are living under my roof for free, Rosie. You eat my food. You use my electricity. Consider this rent, and do not speak to the guests unless they speak to you first. We want to keep things professional." I looked over at Keisha. My daughter was arranging flowers in a crystal vase at the island. She heard every word. She paused for a second, her hand hovering over a lily, And then she continued arranging the flowers. She did not look at me. She did not defend me. That silence hurt more than the moth-eaten jacket. "Fine," I said. I went to the pantry and put on the jacket. It was tight across the shoulders. My arms were built from lifting lumber and swinging hammers, not serving canapes. I buttoned it up, feeling like a clown in a circus, and walked out into the living room. By 6 o'clock, the room was full of men in navy blue suits and women in cocktail dresses. The air was thick with the smell of expensive cologne and artificial laughter. I moved through the crowd with a silver tray offering stuffed mushrooms and shrimp. I felt invisible, a piece of furniture that occasionally offered food. Then I heard a voice I recognized. It was one of Blake's bosses, a man named Sterling. He was holding a scotch and looking at me with a frown. "Blake," he called out, his voice booming over the jazz music. "Is that your wife's father? I thought I saw a family photo in the hallway." My heart stopped. This was the moment. This was the moment Blake could claim me. He could say, "Yes, that is Roosevelt Jefferson. He built half the commercial district downtown. He is the reason we are standing in this house." Blake laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Oh no, that is just Rosie. He is an old gardener we used to employ. He fell on hard times, got a bit confused in his old age, so we let him stay here and help out around the house. It is a charity thing. You know how Keisha is with strays." Sterling nodded, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. "That is very noble of you, Blake. Very noble." I stood there, the silver tray trembling slightly in my hand. The old gardener, a stray, a charity case. I looked across the room at Keisha. She was standing by the fireplace holding a glass of white wine. She was looking right at us. She heard him call her father a stray. She took a sip of wine and turned her back, engaging in conversation with a woman in a red dress. She turned her back. I walked to the sidebar to refill a decanter of Cabernet. My hands were shaking not from age, but from a rage so cold it felt like ice in my veins. As the dark red liquid poured into the crystal, my mind drifted back 40 years. I remembered this land. I remembered when there was no house here, no manicured lawn, no paved driveway. It was just Georgia red clay and thick pine forest. I bought this lot with cash I saved from working double shifts. I cleared the trees myself with a chainsaw and a truck. I remembered the day I poured the foundation. It was July, 95 degrees with 100% humidity. I mixed the concrete. I laid the rebar. I smoothed the surface until it was level as a lake. Every beam in this house I framed, every pipe I plumbed, every electrical wire I ran. I built this house so my daughter would never know what it was like to be cold or insecure. I built it to be a fortress for my family. And now the man who married my daughter, a man who had never calloused his hands on anything harder than a golf club, was telling strangers that I was a charity case in the house that my sweat built. He thought he owned this place because he held the keys. He forgot that I knew where the shut-off valves were. I knew which walls were load-bearing. I knew that if you pull the right brick, the whole structure comes down. The sound of shattering glass snapped me back to the present. I had turned from the bar with the wine bottle in my hand. A man, one of Blake's younger colleagues, had spun around wildly while telling a joke, his arm flailing out. He smacked the bottle right out of my hand. Red wine exploded everywhere. It drenched the white carpet. It splashed across the man's expensive gray suit. It soaked the front of my white service jacket. The music stopped. The room went silent. "You clumsy old fool," the man shouted, jumping back and brushing at his lapels. "Look what you did. This is Italian wool." I stood there, wine dripping from my chin. It wasn't my fault. He had hit me. But before I could speak, Blake was there. He grabbed me by the shoulder of the jacket and shoved me backward. "Rosie, what is wrong with you?" Blake screamed, his face turning red. "I give you one simple job, and you ruin it. Do you know how much this carpet costs? Do you know who this is?" "It was an accident," I said, my voice steady. He turned into me. "Do not talk back to me," Blake hissed. "You are embarrassing me. You are embarrassing this family. Look at this mess." He pointed at the floor, then at his colleague. "Apologize," Blake commanded. "Apologize to him right now." I looked at the man in the gray suit. He was sneering at me, waiting for the help to submit. I looked at Blake, his eyes bulging with entitlement. I looked for Keisha. She was still by the fireplace, staring at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. The silence stretched out. I could feel the eyes of every person in the room on me. The old gardener, the charity case, the clumsy servant. I took a deep breath. I felt the weight of 40 years of hard labor in my shoulders. I felt the dignity of a man who had built skyscrapers. And then I buried it all. I lowered my head. I slumped my shoulders. I let myself become the small, defeated old man they wanted to see. "I am sorry, sir," I mumbled, staring at the wine stain on the carpet. "I am very sorry. I am getting old." My hands shake. "I did not mean to cause trouble." Blake let out a scoff of disgust. "Get a towel, Rosie. Clean this up. And then get out of my sight. Go back to the basement." I got down on my knees. I took the rag from my pocket and began to dab at the red stain on the white carpet. The guests turned back to their conversations, the tension breaking into laughter and whispers about the hazards of hiring cheap help. But as I scrubbed the carpet, I wasn't thinking about the wine. I was doing math. I added the cost of the Italian suit to the ledger. I added the cost of the white carpet. I added the price of the wine. And then I added the price of my dignity. I scrubbed the floor, but in my head I was making a list. I was listing everything I was going to take from them. The house, the car, the reputation, the comfort. Blake thought he had just put a servant in his place. He didn't realize he had just handed the demolition orders to the foreman. I finished cleaning the spot, stood up, and walked toward the basement door with my head bowed. I did not look at Keisha. I did not need to. She had made her choice when she turned her back. I closed the basement door behind me and locked it. I took off the wine-stained jacket and threw it in the trash. I sat down on my cot and pulled out my notebook. Day 9. The humiliation was complete. Now, the eviction could begin. 8 days before Thanksgiving, the house sat in a silence so deep it felt heavy. Blake had left for the city in his leased BMW, projecting the image of a titan of industry, while Keisha had gone to her part-time job at the boutique. They thought they had left the house empty save for the old man in the basement. They forgot that the old man built the walls they were hiding behind. I waited until the electric hum of the garage door motor faded completely. Then I walked up the basement stairs, my boots heavy on the wood I had sanded and stained myself 20 years ago. I headed straight for the one room that was strictly off limits. Blake's home office. The door was locked, of course. A standard interior privacy lock. To a man who has installed bank vaults and reinforced steel doors, a privacy lock is a joke. I pulled a thin tension wrench and a pick from my pocket. It took me 4 seconds. The mechanism clicked a soft surrender in the quiet hallway. I turned the knob and stepped inside. The room smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Papers were scattered everywhere, piles of unopened envelopes accumulating like snowdrifts on the mahogany desk. This was not the workspace of a successful broker. This was the bunker of a man under siege. I sat in his leather chair. It squeaked under my weight. I did not touch the computer. Men like Blake put their public lives on screens, but they hide their shame in paper. They hide the things they cannot delete in the bottom drawers. I went straight for the filing cabinet. Locked. I popped it open with the same ease as the door. I started flipping through the files. I was not looking for love letters or diaries. I was looking for the numbers. In construction, numbers do not lie. If the load-bearing capacity is 10 tons and you put 11 on it, the building collapses. It is simple physics. I wanted to know the physics of Blake's life. I found the tax returns first. They were dismal. He hadn't made a commission in 6 months. Then I found the credit card statements. Maxed out. Visa, MasterCard, Amex. He was juggling balance transfers like a circus performer, but those were just cracks in the drywall. I was looking for the structural failure. Then I found it. Tucked in the back of the bottom drawer inside a plain manila envelope with no label. I pulled out a thick stack of documents. My hands, usually steady as stone, trembled slightly as I read the cover page. It was a loan agreement, but not from a bank. It was from a private equity firm with an address in a strip mall. A predatory lender. I turned the page and saw the number. $400,000. I kept reading. The money had been borrowed 6 months ago. The collateral was listed clearly. 1402 Maple Drive. My house. The house I held the deed to. The house I had let them live in so they could save money. I flipped to the signature page. My heart hammered against my ribs like a sledgehammer. There at the bottom of the page was a signature. Roosevelt Jefferson. It was my name. But it was not my hand. The loops were too wide. The pressure was too light. It was a forgery. A clumsy, desperate forgery made by a man who thought I was too old and too stupid to ever check the registry of deeds. I looked at the date. Then I looked at the repayment schedule. It was a balloon loan, high interest, short term. The full principal plus interest was due in full on November 29th, 2 days after Thanksgiving. The picture snapped into focus with terrifying clarity. Blake had gambled everything on cryptocurrency. I saw the trading printouts underneath the loan documents, red ink everywhere. He had lost it all. He had forged my signature to leverage my home to cover his losses, hoping for a market rebound that never came. Now the deadline was looming. If he didn't pay by the 29th, the sharks would come for the house. That was why his parents were coming. He wasn't hosting them to brag. He was hosting them to beg. He needed a bailout. And he needed me gone because if his wealthy father saw a senile old man in the basement, he might ask questions. If he saw the true owner of the house, the lies would crumble. They were not just kicking me out because they were ashamed of me. They were kicking me out because they had already sold me down the river. They needed the house empty so they could either refinance with his parents' money or hand the keys over to the loan sharks without me putting up a fight. I stared at the forged signature. It was a crime. A felony. Identity theft. Mortgage fraud. I took out my phone and snapped clear, high-resolution photos of every page. The loan amount, the address, the forgery, the crypto losses. I documented the ruin of Blake's life page by page. Suddenly, the rumble of the garage door opening vibrated through the floorboards. Keisha. She was home hours early. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I had seconds. I couldn't be found sitting at his desk holding the evidence of his crime. If they knew I knew, they might do something drastic. Desperate men do dangerous things. I shoved the papers back into the manila envelope and threw it into the back of the drawer. I kicked the drawer shut. I stood up and looked around frantically. I grabbed a microfiber cloth from the bookshelf and started wiping the surface of the desk. Footsteps pounded up the stairs, fast, angry. The door to the office flew open. Keisha stood there, still in her coat, her eyes wide with shock and instant fury. She saw me standing by Blake's desk, a rag in my hand. "Dad!" she screamed. "What are you doing in here?" I hunched my shoulders. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I put on the mask of the confused old man. I was looking for the newspaper, Keisha, I stammered, wiping the corner of the desk with the cloth. And it was dusty in here. I thought I would clean up for Blake. He likes things clean. Keisha marched across the room and snatched the cloth from my hand. "You are not supposed to be in here," she hissed. "Blake has told you 1,000 times. This is his private office. You are not to touch his things. You are prying. You are a nosy, senile old man." She pushed me toward the door. Her hands were rough. This was the girl I used to carry on my shoulders to parades. This was the girl whose scraped knees I bandaged. Now she was shoving me out of a room to protect the husband who was bankrupting us both. "I am sorry, baby," I muttered, shuffling my feet. "I just wanted to help. I forgot." "You always forget," she snapped. "You forget everything. Get downstairs. Stay in the basement until dinner. I cannot deal with you right now. I have a headache." I walked to the door, keeping my head down. I let her see a broken, confused father. I let her see a man who was losing his grip on reality. But as I turned the corner to the stairs, my eyes were dry and clear. I felt the weight of the phone in my pocket, hot against my leg. I had the photos. I had the proof. She called me a nosy old man. She was right. I was nosy. And I had just found the bomb that was going to blow their world apart. I walked down the basement stairs, descending back into the dark. But the darkness didn't bother me anymore. I sat on my cot and looked at the photos on my phone screen. $400,000. November 29th. I knew the schedule now. I knew the stakes. And I knew exactly how to bring the whole structure down on top of their heads. Day 8. The reconnaissance was over. It was time to call the demolition crew. 7 days before Thanksgiving, the morning air was crisp and bit at my exposed skin like a warning. I sat on a peeling green bench in Washington Park, 3 blocks from the house that was no longer a home. Pigeons pecked at the asphalt near my boots, oblivious to the fact that a war was being planned just above their heads. I reached into the deep inner pocket of my heavy coat and pulled out a phone. It wasn't the smartphone Keisha monitored, the one she checked to see if I had wandered off or called for help. This was a throwaway, a prepaid flip phone I had bought with cash 5 years ago and kept fully charged in a hollowed-out book in the basement. It was my lifeline to a life they thought was dead. I dialed a number I knew better than my own social security number. It rang twice. Roosevelt, a deep, cultured voice answered. It was Arthur Thorne. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was the man who held the keys to the vault. I am surprised to hear from you on this line. Is there an emergency? There is no emergency. Arthur, I said, my voice steady against the wind. It is an eviction. I waited a beat, letting the words settle over the line. I want you to activate Protocol 17, I said. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear the rustle of papers, the sound of a heavy leather chair creaking as Thorne sat up straight. Protocol 17. Thorne repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper. Rosie, are you sure? That is the nuclear option. We drafted that 10 years ago as a contingency for absolute catastrophe. The catastrophe has arrived, I replied. I want you to sell the house at 1402 Maple Drive. But Roosevelt, that is your residence. That is where Keisha lives. Not for long, I said. I want you to sell it immediately, and I want you to sell it to the Falcon Development Group. Thorne gasped. Falcon. Rosie, you know what they do. They are commercial sharks. They have been trying to buy that block for a decade to build a strip mall. If you sell to them, they will not preserve the structure. They will flatten it. That is exactly what I want, I said, staring at a squirrel running up an oak tree. I want a specific clause in the sale contract. Immediate possession, immediate demolition. I want the bulldozers on the lawn the moment the ink is dry. I want the contract signed, sealed, and executed by noon on Thanksgiving Day. Thorne paused. I could almost hear his legal mind racing, looking for a way to talk me down. Rosie, listen to me, he said gently. I know things have been strained with Keisha and that husband of hers. But this is cruel. If you do this, you are putting your own daughter on the street. You are destroying an asset worth $500,000 just to make a point. Can we not just evict them legally? It takes 90 days, but it is cleaner. I do not have 90 days, I snapped. Blake forged my signature on a predatory loan. He owes $400,000 to sharks and the house is the collateral. The deadline is November 29th. If I do not sell it and destroy it before then, the sharks take it anyway and I lose the equity. This way I cash out and Blake is left holding a bag of debt with no asset to back it up. Thorne let out a low whistle. Forgery. That boy has a death wish. He has a death wish, I agreed, and he tried to drag me into the grave with him. They are planning to commit me, Arthur. They want to put me in Shady Pines. They think I am a senile old fool who is in the way. The line went silent again, but this time it was a cold, angry silence. Thorne knew Shady Pines. He knew what that meant. Okay, Thorne said, his voice hard as granite. I understand. Protocol 17 is active. I will draw up the papers today. Falcon Group will jump at this. They will pay cash. They will pay a premium for the speed. Good, I said. And Arthur, make sure the demolition crew is booked for noon on Thursday. I want the turkey to be warm on the table when the walls come down. I will handle it, Thorne said. But Rosie, are you sure about Falcon? You know who sits on that board. I smiled, a thin, humorless expression that no one in the park could see. I know exactly who sits on that board, Arthur, I said. I do. I hung up the phone and snapped it shut. I sat there for a moment, letting the cold air fill my lungs. Arthur Thorne was a good man, but he sometimes forgot the details. He forgot why the Falcon Development Group was called Falcon. He forgot that 30 years ago, when Atlanta was booming and black contractors were being shut out of the big downtown bids, a group of us met in a back room of a barbecue joint on Sweet Auburn Avenue. We pooled our money. We pooled our resources. We created a holding company that didn't have a face, just a name. Falcon. I wasn't just selling my house to a developer. I was selling my house to myself. I owned 15% of Falcon Development Group. My name wasn't on the website. My face wasn't in the annual reports. I was a silent partner, a ghost in the machine. For 30 years, I had used my dividends to reinvest to build a portfolio that would ensure my family never went hungry. Keisha didn't know. Blake certainly didn't know. They looked at my calloused hands and my dirty overalls and saw a laborer. They didn't see the man who owned the building Blake's brokerage firm rented their offices from. They didn't see the man who sat on the board that approved the construction of the very mall Keisha liked to shop at. I had kept it secret to protect them. I wanted them to build their own lives, to find their own strength. I didn't want them to be trust fund babies who never learned the value of a dollar. But Blake hadn't learned. He had just learned how to steal. And Keisha hadn't learned. She had just learned how to betray. I stood up from the bench. My knees popped, but I felt stronger than I had in years. The secret I had carried was no longer a burden. It was a weapon. I was going to sell my house to my own company. I was going to pay myself for the privilege of destroying the roof over my traitorous children's heads and the money from the sale. I would put it right back into the Falcon Fund. It was the perfect circle, the perfect justice. I checked my watch. I had been gone 20 minutes. Keisha would be waking up soon. She would check the basement to make sure the old man was still there, still confused, still helpless. I walked back toward the house, slipping the burner phone back into its hiding place inside my coat. I practiced my shuffle. I let my shoulders slump. I relaxed my face into a mask of benign confusion. Let them think they are in control for a few more days, I thought. Let them plan their dinner. Let them invite their guests. Because when the clock strikes 12 on Thanksgiving Day, they are going to find out that the man they tried to bury is the man who owns the shovel. I turned the corner onto Maple Drive. The house looked peaceful in the morning light. It looked solid. It looked permanent. It was a lie. It was already dust. It just didn't know it yet. 6 days before Thanksgiving, the psychological warfare began in the kitchen. I woke up to the smell of bacon and fresh coffee scents that usually signal a warm family morning. But in this house, they were the opening shots of a coordinated attack on my sanity. I walked into the kitchen wearing my flannel pajamas, shuffling my feet just enough to maintain the illusion of frailty. Blake was leaning against the granite island, holding his smartphone with the camera lens pointed directly at me. Keisha was at the stove, her back rigid. "Good morning, Rosie," Blake said, his voice dripping with a fake, loud cheerfulness usually reserved for toddlers or the hard of hearing. "Did you sleep well? Do you know what day it is?" I ignored his tone and went to the cabinet where I kept my blood pressure medication. I reached for the orange bottle that had sat on the second shelf for 5 years. My hand grasped nothing but air. I blinked and felt around. The shelf was empty. I moved the spice jars. Nothing. I turned to Keisha. "Keisha, baby, have you seen my pills? I put them right here yesterday." Keisha turned around, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She refused to meet my eyes. "Dad, we talked about this," she said, her voice tight. "You finished that bottle 3 days ago. You threw it out. Do you not remember?" I stared at her. I had refilled that prescription on Monday. The bottle was full. This was gaslighting, pure and simple. They were trying to make me doubt my own mind, or worse, create a record of my incompetence. "I did not finish them," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I just got them." Blake stepped closer, the phone camera tracking my every movement. "See, this is what we are dealing with," Blake narrated to the invisible audience on his phone. "He forgets his medication. He gets confused about dates. It is getting dangerous for him to be alone." I felt a spike of anger, but I pushed it down. If they wanted a show, I would give them a performance worthy of an Academy Award. I started opening other cabinets, moving with exaggerated franticness. "They have to be here," I muttered, making my hands tremble. "I need them. My heart. Where did you put them?" I knocked a box of cereal off the counter. It hit the floor with a loud crash. "Dad, stop it!" Keisha yelled, but she didn't move to help me. Blake zoomed in on the spilled cereal. "Aggressive behavior," Blake whispered to the camera. "Disoriented. Destructive." I stopped searching and leaned against the counter, panting. I needed coffee. I needed to clear my head. I reached for the sugar bowl next to the coffee maker. I took 2 large spoonfuls and stirred them into my mug. I took a big gulp. Salt. It was pure, concentrated salt. I spit the coffee back into the mug, coughing and sputtering. The taste burned my throat. "What is wrong with you?" Blake asked, suppressing a smirk. "You put salt in the sugar bowl," I rasped. Keisha shook her head, looking at me with pity that felt like a slap. "Dad, that is the salt cellar. The sugar is in the blue jar. It has always been in the blue jar. You are getting mixed up again." I looked at the white ceramic bowl. It said sugar right on the side. They had switched the contents. They were trying to break me. They wanted me to lash out. They wanted me to scream that they were liars so they could record me looking paranoid and unhinged. I looked at Blake. He was grinning behind his phone. He thought he had me. He thought he was documenting the decline of a senile old man. He didn't know about the button on my pajama top. It looked like a standard plastic button, slightly mismatched with the others, but inside was a high-definition camera lens with a microphone. I had bought it from a private investigator friend 3 years ago, just in case I ever had trouble on a job site. I had sewn it on last night in the dark. While Blake was recording me, I was recording him. I decided to give them exactly what they wanted. I let my shoulders slump. I let my face crumble into an expression of utter defeat. "I am sorry," I whispered, looking at the floor. "I am so confused. I do not know what is happening to me. Maybe you are right. Maybe I am not safe here." Blake lowered his phone, his eyes lighting up with victory. "We are just worried about you, Rosie," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "We think you need professional help. We found a place where they can watch you 24 hours a day. It is for your own good." I nodded slowly. "Shady Pines," I mumbled. "It is a nice place," Keisha lied. I shuffled toward the basement door. "I need to lie down," I said. "My head hurts." "Go ahead," Blake said. "Rest up. We have a big day tomorrow." I walked down the stairs, gripping the railing like an invalid. I heard them high-fiving in the kitchen. "Did you get it?" Keisha asked. "I got everything," Blake bragged. The spilled cereal, the spitting, the confusion, the admission that he isn't safe. This is gold, baby. The doctor will have to sign the commitment papers now. We show him this video, and Rosie is in a locked ward by Tuesday. I reached the bottom of the stairs and locked the door behind me. I walked to my cot and sat down. My hands stopped trembling immediately. I spat the lingering taste of salt into the utility sink and rinsed my mouth with cold water from the tap. I reached up and touched the button on my chest. I tapped it twice to save the recording. They thought they were the directors of this movie. They thought they were editing the narrative of my life. They didn't realize they were just actors in a documentary about their own destruction. I pulled the real bottle of blood pressure pills from inside my pillowcase where I had hidden them the night before. I knew they would come for the meds. It was the oldest trick in the book. I took a pill and swallowed it dry. Then I pulled out the burner phone. I had a message from Thorne. "The Falcon Group is ready. Papers are drafted. Demolition crew is on standby." I typed a reply. Add a clause. The contents of the basement remain the property of the seller. I looked around my underground prison, my tools, my blueprints, the photos of my wife Beatrice that I had hidden down here so Keisha wouldn't throw them away. Let them have their video, I thought. Let them show it to the doctor. Let them think they have won. It will only make the fall that much harder. I lay back on the cot and closed my eyes. I could hear Blake upstairs calling his parents. "Everything is going according to plan," he was saying. "The house will be cleared out by the time you land." I smiled in the dark. "Yes, Blake, it will be cleared out. But not the way you think." Day 6 was over. The gaslighting had failed. The fuse was lit. And tomorrow I would take a trip to Shady Pines to see exactly what kind of hell they had prepared for me. It was time to inspect the prison before I burned down the courthouse. 5 days before Thanksgiving, Keisha drove me to hell in a Lexus SUV. The leather seats were heated, a luxury I had paid for when I secretly covered her car payments last year, but the warmth did nothing to thaw the chill in my bones. We were headed to the edge of town past the strip malls and the new developments to a part of the city that city planners forgot. We were going to Shady Pines. Keisha called it a tour. She said we were just going to look at options. But I saw the suitcase in the trunk when she opened it earlier. I saw the way she kept checking her watch, anxious to get the package delivered. When we pulled into the parking lot, my heart sank. The building was a squat gray concrete block surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with something that looked suspiciously like razor wire. The sign out front was missing the letter S, so it read Shady Pines. Weeds choked the flower beds where dead marigolds rotted in the November mud. "This is it," Keisha said, her voice high and brittle. "It looks rustic, but the brochure said they have a great community garden." I got out of the car. The air smelled of diesel fumes from the nearby highway and something else, something faint and sweet and terrible, decay. We walked to the front door. The electronic lock buzzed angrily and a heavy steel door swung open. The smell hit me instantly. It was a physical wall of industrial bleach, boiled cabbage, and unwashed bodies. It was the smell of a place where people go to wait for the end. A woman in scrubs that were 2 sizes too small met us at the desk. She didn't look at me. She looked at Keisha's designer handbag. "You must be the daughter," the woman said, snapping gum. "And this is the admission." My father, Keisha corrected quickly. "We have an appointment for a tour." "Right," the woman grunted. "Follow me. Don't touch the walls. We just painted." We walked down a long corridor under flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed like trapped flies. The linoleum floor was scuffed and sticky. On either side, doors stood open, revealing rooms the size of closets. In each one, 2 hospital beds were crammed together, separated only by a thin, stained curtain. I looked into room 104. An old man was sitting in a wheelchair facing the corner. He was wearing a hospital gown that was open at the back. He was shivering. "Look, Dad," Keisha said, pointing to a bulletin board with a single flyer for a bingo night that had happened 3 months ago. "They have activities. You love games. You will make so many friends here." I looked at the friends. A line of residents sat in the hallway in wheelchairs slumped over chins on their chests. They were sedated. Drool glistened on their chins. No one was talking. No one was playing bingo. They were staring at a blank wall where a television should have been. "It is very peaceful," Keisha lied, her eyes darting around, refusing to land on the human misery in front of us. "You need peace, Dad. The house is too chaotic for you with Blake's work and the guests coming. Here you can just relax." We reached the cafeteria. It was a room with folding tables and plastic chairs. A worker was slopping something gray and lumpy onto plastic trays. "The food is nutritious," Keisha stammered. "And look, big windows." The windows looked out onto a brick wall and a dumpster. I stopped walking. I stood in the middle of the hallway, surrounded by the moans of the forgotten. I looked at my daughter. Keisha was 35 years old. I remembered holding her when she was a baby, promising her that I would always keep her safe. I remembered sitting up with her when she had the chickenpox, reading her stories until my voice gave out. I remembered paying for her braces, her prom dress, her college tuition. I had built her a life, brick by brick. And this was her return on that investment. A room in a warehouse that smelled of death. "Dad, please," Keisha whispered, grabbing my arm. Her grip was tight, desperate. "Do not make a scene. This is the best we can do. It is expensive to live in the city. Blake says this is the only way we can get ahead. You want us to be happy, don't you?" She was pleading with me to agree to my own incarceration so her husband could buy a new boat. She was asking me to die quietly so she wouldn't have to feel guilty. I looked at her face. I searched for the little girl who used to cry when she stepped on a bug. She was gone. In her place was a woman consumed by the need to please a man who despised her heritage and her father. I saw the greed in her eyes, but it wasn't even her own greed. It was a borrowed hunger. She wanted what Blake wanted because she was terrified he would leave her if she didn't give it to him. She saw me as a resource that had run dry, an empty wallet, a piece of trash that needed to be taken out before the real company arrived. In that moment, the last tether of fatherly obligations snapped. I did not see my child anymore. I saw a stranger. I saw a conspirator. I saw a monster who was hungry for the marrow of my bones. If I fought her now, if I screamed and refused, she would just find a way to drug me or force me. Blake would call the police and say I was violent. They would drag me in here in handcuffs. No, I had to play the game. I had to walk into the trap so I could dismantle it from the inside. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of bleach and betrayal. I let my face go slack. I let my eyes look tired and defeated. "It is okay, Keisha," I said, my voice soft. "I understand. You have your own life now. I am just tired. Maybe you are right. Maybe I need to rest." Keisha let out a breath she had been holding for 10 minutes. Her shoulders dropped. A smile, genuine and terrifying, spread across her face. "Oh, Dad, thank you," she gushed. "You will see. It is going to be great. You just need a few days to adjust. We will bring you on Monday morning. Just in time for the doctors to check you out." She meant just in time for Thanksgiving to be free of me. "Okay, baby," I said. "Monday." She hugged me. It was a cold hug. She was hugging a problem that had just solved itself. She was hugging a check that was about to clear. We walked back to the car. I didn't look back at the building. I didn't need to. I knew I would never spend a night in there. As we drove away, Keisha turned on the radio and started humming along to a pop song. She was happy. She had done the dirty work. She had disposed of the body. I looked out the window at the passing city. I saw a construction crane in the distance lifting a steel beam. I thought about Falcon Development Group. I thought about the demolition order sitting on Arthur Thorne's desk. Keisha thought she was driving me home to pack. She didn't know she was driving a man who had just authorized the destruction of her world. She thought she had won. She thought I was weak. She forgot that you don't judge a building by its paint. You judge it by its foundation. And hers was built on sand. Monday, I thought. You want to bring me here on Monday. By Monday, you won't have a car to drive me in. I closed my eyes and let her drive me back to the house I was about to erase from the map. Day 5 was over. The tour of hell was complete. Now it was time to bring the fire. 4 days before Thanksgiving, the final eviction order was delivered not by a judge but by my son-in-law standing in the kitchen doorway holding a can of air freshener. It was 7 in the morning and I was sitting at the small breakfast table in the corner trying to eat a piece of dry toast without drawing attention to myself. The house was already beginning to transform. The furniture had been rearranged to look more spacious, and the photos of my late wife and me had been taken down from the mantel, replaced by generic art prints of sailboats and geometric shapes. Blake walked into the room and immediately sprayed a cloud of lavender scent into the air, wrinkling his nose as if he had just stepped into a sewer. He looked at me with a mixture of impatience and disgust. "Rosie, we have a situation," Blake announced, setting the can down on the counter with a thud. "My parents called. They are driving down early. They will be here tomorrow afternoon." I chewed my toast slowly, not looking up. "That is nice, Blake," I said. "Safe travels to them." "No, you do not understand," Blake snapped, stepping closer. "We need to prep the house. Specifically, we need to prep the basement. It smells down there. It smells like old man and grease and failure. We cannot have my mother smelling that. She has very delicate sensibilities." I put the toast down. My appetite was gone. "What do you want me to do, Blake? I will scrub the floor again." "Scrubbing is not enough," Blake said, crossing his arms. "We need to air it out, fumigate it, whatever. The point is you cannot sleep down there tonight, or tomorrow, or until they leave." I looked at him. He was kicking me out of the basement of my own house. "Where am I supposed to sleep, Blake?" "The guest room is for your parents." Blake pointed a manicured finger toward the backyard. "The shed." I stared at him. The shed was a 12 by 12 wooden structure I had built 15 years ago to store the riding lawnmower and the gardening tools. It was uninsulated. It had a single window that didn't close all the way. It had electricity, but only a single bulb dangling from a wire. It was November in Atlanta. The nights were dipping into the 30s. The shed. I repeated, my voice flat. "It is freezing out there, Blake. There is no heat." "It is just for a few nights," Rosie, Blake said dismissively. "Grab a couple of extra blankets. You are tough, right? You used to work construction. You have slept in worse places. Besides, it is better for everyone. You will be out of the way. You won't have to worry about spilling drinks on my guests or saying something stupid. It is a win-win." Keisha walked in, then holding a cup of coffee. She stopped when she saw the tension in the room. "He wants me to sleep in the tool shed, Keisha," I said, looking directly at my daughter, like a dog. Keisha looked at Blake, then at me. She bit her lip. She knew it was wrong. I could see the flicker of guilt in her eyes, the last remnant of the girl I raised. But then she looked at the new curtains, the expensive appliances, the life she was terrified of losing. The guilt flickered out. "Daddy, it is. It is really cluttered in the basement," Keisha said, her voice weak. "And Blake's mom is really allergic to dust. Maybe it would be better, just for a couple of nights. We can run an extension cord out there for a space heater. It will be like camping. Remember when we used to go camping?" Camping. She was comparing sleeping next to a gas can and a lawnmower to our family trips to the Blue Ridge Mountains. "Fine," I said. I stood up, pushing the chair back. The shed. I walked past them, head down, shoulders slumped. I let them think they had broken me. I let them think I was retreating. I went down to the basement one last time. I didn't pack clothes, I didn't pack toiletries. I grabbed a small canvas bag. Into it I put the only things that mattered. The deed to the house, the original copy which I had kept taped behind the water heater. My passport. And the photo album of Beatrice and me from when we built this place. I walked out the back door without saying a word. The wind hit me instantly cold and biting. I trudged across the lawn, the grass crunching under my boots. The shed was cold dark and smelled of gasoline and fertilizer. I cleared a space on the workbench and set my bag down. I found an old tarp and laid it over a stack of fertilizer bags to make a bed. I sat there in the gloom, my breath misting in the air. I wasn't cold. The fire inside me was burning too hot for that. I checked my burner phone. One message from Thorne. "The paperwork is ready. The buyer is ready. Just give the word." I didn't reply yet. I needed to see one more thing. I needed to see how far they would go. Night fell early. The temperature dropped. I wrapped myself in the tarp, sitting on a bucket near the shed window. I had a direct view of the back of the house. The kitchen lights were blazing. I could see Keisha and Blake moving around, laughing, drinking wine. They looked happy. They looked relieved. The problem was gone. The The stain had been removed. Around 10 o'clock, the back door opened. A beam of yellow light cut across the dark yard. Blake stepped out. He was struggling with something heavy. He was dragging it across the floorboards of the deck. I squinted through the dirty glass of the shed window. It was a chair. My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't just any chair. It was the burgundy leather wingback armchair that Beatrice had bought me for our 30th anniversary. It was the chair I sat in every evening to read the paper. It was the chair where I had held Keisha when she had her heart broken for the first time. It was the chair where I sat the night Beatrice died, holding her hand until the ambulance came. That chair was molded to my body. It smelled of my pipe tobacco and Beatrice's perfume. It was the throne of this house. Blake dragged it to the edge of the deck. He didn't lift it. He didn't carry it with respect. He shoved it. The chair tumbled down the 3 wooden steps, bouncing violently. One of the legs snapped with a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the quiet night. It landed upside down in the mud near the garbage cans. "Get that piece of junk out of here," I heard Blake yell back into the house. "I am not having my parents see that rotting leather monstrosity. It smells like a nursing home." Keisha appeared in the doorway. She held a trash bag. She walked down the steps, stepped over the broken chair without even looking at it, and tossed the bag into the bin. She turned around and went back inside. Blake kicked the chair once, hard, as if to make sure it was dead. Then he followed her in and slammed the door. The lock clicked. I sat in the shed, watching my chair lying broken in the mud. It looked like a corpse. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet final sound of a structural beam giving way under too much weight. I had built that house for them. I had given them my savings. I had given them my dignity. I had even given them my silence. But that chair was Beatrice. They had thrown my wife into the mud. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the burner phone. My hands were steady. My eyes were dry. I didn't feel the cold anymore. I didn't feel the hunger. I only felt the absolute clarity of a man who has nothing left to lose because it has all been taken from him. I dialed Thorne's number. It went to voicemail. "Execute the contract," I said into the phone. "Noon on Thursday. Tell the demolition crew to bring the big excavators. I want the foundation dug up. I want the earth salted." I hung up. I looked at the house one last time. It glowed warmly in the night, a beacon of comfort and family. "Enjoy it, Blake," I whispered to the cold air. "Enjoy the warmth. Enjoy the wine. Enjoy the illusion that you are the king of the castle. Because you just threw away the only man who could have saved you from the wolves. And now the wolves are coming. And they are driving bulldozers." I lay back on the fertilizer bags and closed my eyes. For the first time in 10 days, I slept peacefully. I had no more decisions to make. The plunger had been pushed. Now I just had to wait for the explosion. 3 days before Thanksgiving, the reality of Blake's financial ruin came knocking at the front door. Literally. It was 8 in the morning, and the banging on the oak panels was loud enough to shake the dust off the chandeliers. It was not the rhythmic knock of a delivery driver or the polite tap of a neighbor. It was the heavy, insistent pounding of a man who intended to break the door down if it was not opened. I was in the shed heating a can of beans on a hot plate I had found under a pile of rags. I heard the noise and walked to the dirty window. A black SUV with tinted windows was idling in the driveway, blocking Keisha's car. A man was standing on the porch. He was huge, wearing a leather jacket that strained against his shoulders, and his shaved head glistened with rain. I knew exactly what he was. In my 40 years of construction working in parts of Atlanta that tourists do not visit, I had met men like him. He was a collector, a muscle, the kind of man who collected debts with a tire iron. Inside the house, panic had erupted. I saw the kitchen blinds twitch. I saw Blake running through the hallway, hunched over, looking like a rat scurrying for a hole. He was wearing his silk pajamas, and his face was pale with terror. Keisha ran to the back door and threw it open. She did not step out into the cold. She just hissed at me across the yard. "Dad, get in here, right now." I turned off the hot plate and walked slowly to the house. When I entered the kitchen, Blake was crouching behind the granite island, shaking. He looked at me with wild eyes. "Rosie, you have to answer the door," Blake whispered, his voice cracking. "Who is it?" I asked, feigning ignorance. It is a contractor," Blake lied, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "We had a disagreement about a bill. He is unreasonable. If he sees me, he is going to make a scene. I cannot deal with this right now. My parents are coming tomorrow. I cannot have a bruised face. "You want me to answer the door?" I asked. "Yes," Keisha interjected, grabbing my arm and pushing me toward the hallway. "Just tell him Blake isn't here. Tell him he moved. Tell him anything. Just make him go away." "You are old. He won't hurt an old man." The cowardice was breathtaking. Blake owed money to dangerous people, and instead of facing them like a man, he was using his 73-year-old father-in-law as a human shield. He was hiding behind the granite counter I paid for in the pajamas I probably paid for, asking me to take a beating for him. "Fine," I said. I walked down the hallway. The banging continued louder now. The wood was starting to splinter around the frame. I unlocked the deadbolt and swung the door open. The man on the porch stopped mid-swing. He looked down at me. He was at least 6'4" with a scar running through his left eyebrow and hands the size of shovels. He smelled of tobacco and violence. "Where is Blake?" he growled. His voice sounded like gravel grinding in a mixer. "Blake is not available," I said calmly, leaning against the door frame. The man laughed a short, sharp bark. "Not available. Listen here, old-timer. I know his car is in the driveway. I know he is in there. You tell that little thief that he owes 400 grand and the interest just went up. You tell him if he does not come out here, I am coming in there and I am going to start breaking things. Starting with you." He stepped forward, invading my personal space. He grabbed the lapel of my flannel shirt and yanked me toward him. He lifted me onto my toes. His fist drew back. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I looked him dead in the eye. I saw the tattoo on his neck. A small, stylized spiderweb with a crown in the center. I knew that symbol. And more importantly, I knew the history of the building where that symbol was born. "Wait," I said. My voice was not loud, but it had the steel timbre of a foreman giving an order on a dangerous site. The man paused, his fist hovering inches from my face. "Before you throw that punch, son," I said, keeping my eyes locked on his, "I want you to deliver a message for me." The man frowned, confused by my lack of fear. "A message? You think you are in a position to send messages, old man? I want you to go back to your boss," I said, lowering my voice to a whisper that only he could hear. "I want you to tell Solomon Cobb that Roosevelt Jefferson says hello." The man froze. His eyes widened slightly. The name Solomon Cobb was not a name you spoke lightly in this city. He was a myth, a ghost, the man who ran the numbers, the unions, and the streets for 30 years. "You do not know Solomon Cobb," the man sneered, though his grip on my shirt loosened slightly. "I poured the foundation for his first club on Peachtree Street in 1982, I whispered. "I built the safe room in his grandmother's house in Vine City because he did not trust anyone else to do it. I fixed the roof of the church where his daughter got married. Ask him who Rosie is. Ask him about the concrete job at the Blue Flame." The color drained from the man's face. He looked at me, really looked at me, searching for the truth in my weathered face. He saw the calluses. He saw the eyes of a man who had seen things. He let go of my shirt. He stepped back, smoothing the fabric he had just wrinkled. His aggression evaporated, replaced by a sudden awkward respect. He looked like a schoolboy who had just realized he was yelling at the principal. "Mr. Jefferson," he stammered. I did not know. The paperwork just said Blake Anderson. Nobody said anything about family." "It is okay, son," I said, adjusting my collar. "You are just doing your job. But you tell Solomon that Blake is my problem, and I will handle him. Tell him the debt will be settled on Thursday." "Thursday," the man repeated, nodding vigorously. "Yes, sir. Thursday. I will tell him. I apologize for the disturbance, sir. Maximum respect." He backed away down the porch steps, keeping his head lowered. He got into the black SUV and drove away slowly without squealing the tires. I closed the door and locked it. I stood there for a moment, listening to the silence. I had not spoken Solomon Cobb's name in 20 years. I walked back to the kitchen. Blake was slowly rising from behind the island, peeking over the top like a prairie dog. Keisha was clutching her chest, looking pale. "Is he gone?" Blake whispered. "He is gone," I said, walking past them to get a glass of water. "What happened?" Keisha asked, her voice trembling. "We heard shouting." "Did he hurt you?" He realized he had the wrong house. I lied. I told him nobody named Blake lived here anymore. He was confused. He left. Blake let out a long, shaky breath and slumped against the counter. He laughed a hysterical, breathless sound. "Oh my God," Blake gasped. "The idiot believed you. He actually believed you." He looked at me, his arrogance rushing back in like a tide now that the danger was gone. "You see? Keisha, Blake said, grinning. I told you he would be useful. Who would hurt a confused old man? It was the perfect disguise. Good job, Rosie. You actually did something right for once. You confused him with your senile act. Keisha nodded, wiping tears of relief from her eyes. Yeah. Good job, Dad. You really sold it. They looked at me with a mix of relief and renewed condescension. They thought I had bumbled my way out of a beating. They thought my frailty was their shield. They had no idea that the only reason they were not in the hospital right now was because I had called in a favor from a past they did not know existed. They did not know that I had just bought them 48 hours of safety not to save them, but to ensure they were present for their own execution on Thursday. Go back to the shed, Rosie Blake said, opening the fridge to grab a beer. We need to calm down and stay out of sight. If he comes back, we need him to think the house is empty. I walked out the back door. I returned to the cold shed and my half-eaten beans. Blake owed $400,000 to Solomon Cobb. I knew Solomon. He was a businessman. He would get his money. And when he found out that the house he was supposed to take as collateral had been demolished by the owner, he would be very unhappy. But he wouldn't be unhappy with me. He would be unhappy with the man who forged the signature. I took a bite of cold beans. Thursday, I thought, noon. The timeline was locked, the players were in place, and Blake just thought he had gotten lucky. Luck runs out. Concrete is forever. Day 2, before Thanksgiving, the betrayal was formalized on 24-pound bond paper. Keisha came to the shed at noon. She did not bring lunch. She brought a clipboard and a black ballpoint pen. Her face was pale and her eyes were darting around the yard as if she expected the police to jump out from behind the azalea bushes. Dad, come to the kitchen, she said, her voice tight. We need to handle some paperwork before the holiday. It is urgent. I followed her into the house. The kitchen was warm, smelling of cinnamon and cloves, a scent that used to mean family but now just smelled like a cover-up. Blake was not there. He was likely hiding in the office watching the driveway for the loan shark, terrified that my message to Solomon Cobb wouldn't hold. It was just me and my daughter. Sit down, Dad, she commanded, pointing to a stool at the island. She placed a thick stack of documents in front of me. They were clipped together with a heavy binder clip. She flipped to the last page, covering the text of the document with her hand, leaving only the signature line exposed. There was a little sticky note with an arrow pointing to the line that said, Grantor. What is this, baby? I asked, letting my voice waver. My hands were trembling, but not from age. I was vibrating with the adrenaline of a man who is about to catch a thief in the act. It is for your medical insurance, Keisha lied. She spoke too fast. The words tumbled out of her mouth. With the new healthcare laws, we need to update your coverage. This just authorizes the doctors to treat you if you get sick. You know, like if you have a fall or a memory lapse. We just want to make sure you are safe, Daddy. I looked at the paper. I reached out to lift her hand so I could read the text. Keisha slammed her hand down, pinning the paper to the granite. Do not read it, Dad, she snapped. It is just legal jargon. It is boring. You would not understand it anyway. Just sign the line. We have to mail this by 5 o'clock, or you lose your coverage. Do you want to lose your doctor? Do you want to be sick and have nobody to help you? She was threatening me with my own mortality. She was weaponizing my health to steal my wealth. I knew exactly what was under her hand. It wasn't medical insurance. It was a durable power of attorney. It was a document that would give her and Blake total control over my bank accounts, my pension, and my property. It was the key to the kingdom. I looked at her face. I saw the sweat beading on her upper lip. I saw the way her fingernails were digging into the paper. She was terrified. She needed this signature. Without it, they couldn't sell the house. Without it, they couldn't pay the shark. Without it, their lives were over. Where are my reading glasses? I asked, patting my chest pocket. I cannot sign anything without my glasses, Keisha. You know that. You do not need them, she practically screamed, shoving the pen into my hand. Just sign your name, right there. Just write Roosevelt Jefferson. Do it for me, Dad, please. If you love me, you will just sign it, if I love her. She was using love as a lever to pry open my coffin. I took the pen. I held it awkwardly, making my hand shake violently. I let the tip of the pen hover over the paper. I looked at her one last time. I wanted to see if there was any hesitation, any remorse, any sign that my daughter was still in there. There was nothing, just greed and panic. Sign it, she whispered. I lowered the pen. I remembered the thousands of contracts I had signed in my career. change orders, liability waivers, payroll checks. My signature was a precision instrument. It was sharp, legible, and authoritative. But today Roosevelt Jefferson did not sign that paper. I pressed the pen to the paper and I let my hand slide. I didn't write my name. I wrote a jagged, looping scrawl that looked like a seismograph of an earthquake. It was nonsense. It was a chaotic mess of ink that bore no resemblance to my legal signature. It looked like the mark of a man who had lost his mind. But more importantly, hidden within the jagged loops, if you looked very closely with a magnifying glass, the letters did not spell Roosevelt. They spelled, I know. I finished the scrawl and let the pen drop from my fingers. It rolled across the counter and hit the floor. There, I rasped. Is that good? Keisha snatched the paper away before the ink was even dry. She stared at the signature. For a second, I thought she would catch it. I thought she would see that it was garbage. But she didn't see the signature. She saw the salvation. She saw $400,000. She saw freedom. It is perfect, Dad. She breathed, her eyes lighting up with a manic joy. It is perfect. You did a good job. She gathered the papers and hugged them to her chest like a newborn baby. Now go back to the shed, she said, her voice suddenly cold and dismissive again. I have to mail this. And stay out of the way. The caterers are coming tomorrow morning. I stood up slowly. My knees cracked. I walked to the back door. Thank you for taking care of me, Keisha, I said, my back to her. Yeah, she muttered, already pulling out her phone to call Blake. Just go, Dad. I walked out into the cold afternoon. I heard her squeal with delight through the glass. I got it, Blake, I heard her shout. He signed it. We own him. We own everything. I walked back to the shed, the wind biting at my face. I sat down on my cot and pulled out the burner phone. They thought they had a power of attorney. What they actually had was a piece of paper with a scribble on it that no court in Georgia would uphold. It was legally worthless. It was trash. But it served its purpose. It gave them false confidence. It made them think they had won. It made them drop their guard. They thought they owned Roosevelt Jefferson. They didn't know that Roosevelt Jefferson had already sold the ground beneath their feet. I sent a text to Thorne. The bait is taken. Proceed with the demolition. Noon, Thursday. No mercy. I lay back on the fertilizer bags. Tomorrow was the day before Thanksgiving. The house would be full of flowers and food. Blake's parents would arrive, and I would be ready. I touched the pocket where I kept my grandfather's pocket watch. It was ticking loudly in the silence of the shed. Tick-tock, Keisha. Tick-tock. Your lease is up. One day before Thanksgiving, the transformation of my home into a stage set was complete. The driveway, which I had paved with my own sweat and concrete 30 years ago, was now clogged with commercial vans. A fleet of workers in matching black uniforms swarmed over the property like ants on a picnic. One van read Elite Catering and Events, while another was marked Prestige Floral Design. Blake was not taking any chances. He was spending money he did not have to impress parents who did not care. I watched it all from the dirty window of the tool shed. I was a prisoner in my own backyard. Blake had come out at dawn with a padlock. He didn't lock me in, but he made it very clear that the back door of the house was now off limits. He told me that the caterers needed the kitchen and the cleaners needed the hallways, and an old man in dirty clothes would ruin the aesthetic. He literally used the word aesthetic. Through the glass, I saw men carrying crates of wine that cost more than my monthly pension check. I saw women arranging elaborate centerpieces of autumn leaves and imported orchids. I saw my daughter Keisha running from room to room, her face tight with stress, directing the staff as if she were a general in a war for social status. She was terrified. She knew that if anything went wrong, if the turkey was dry or the silver was tarnished, Blake would punish her with his silence and his disappointment. They were erasing me. They had moved my recliner to the dump. They had hidden my photos. Now they were scrubbing my very essence from the floorboards. To them, I was already a ghost, a problem that had been solved by a signature on a fake legal document. They thought I was sitting in the shed defeated, waiting to be carted off to the nursing home on Monday. They did not look out the window. If they had, they might have seen that the old man was not crying. He was cleaning his boots. He was preparing his suit. He was checking the time. The sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the yard. The temperature dropped and the shed became an icebox. My stomach rumbled. I had not eaten since the beans yesterday. I was about to open a can of cold soup when the shed door creaked open. I stiffened my hand, moving to the tire iron I kept under the tarp. I expected Blake coming to deliver one last insult or perhaps to confiscate my burner phone. But it was not Blake. A small head poked around the doorframe. It was Trey, my 10-year-old grandson. He was the only innocent soul in this entire nest of vipers. He had his father's blue eyes, but he had my wife Beatrice's smile. "Pop, Pop," he whispered. "Are you in here?" I relaxed my grip on the iron. "Come in, Trey. Close the door. It is cold." He slipped inside and pushed the door shut. He was holding a napkin bundle. "I brought you a biscuit," he said, handing it to me. "Mom said you were not hungry. She said you were fasting for the doctor, but I heard your stomach growl when I was playing in the yard earlier." I took the biscuit. It was warm. Ham and cheese. It was the best thing I had ever seen. "Thank you, son," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Your mother is mistaken. I am very hungry." I ate the biscuit in 2 bites. Trey watched me, his eyes wide and sad. "Why do you have to sleep out here, Pop Pop?" he asked. "My room is warm. You can sleep in my bunk." "Dad won't know." I reached out and brushed a crumb from his cheek. "I cannot, Trey. Your father has rules, and we have to follow them. For now." He kicked at the dirt floor. "I hate it. I hate that they treat you like this. When I grow up, I am going to buy a big house and you can live in the master bedroom." I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had felt in 10 days. "Trey," I said, looking him deep in the eyes, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. You are a good boy. You have a good heart. Do not let this house change that. Do not let your father change that." I reached into the bottom of my left work boot. I pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside was a single card. It was made of black titanium. It was heavy cool to the touch. It was an American Express Centurion card. The black card. Invitation only. Unlimited spending power. It was linked to the Falcon Development Group's primary trust, of which I was the sole beneficiary. I took Trey's small hand and pressed the card into his palm. "What is this?" he asked, looking at the black metal. "It looks like a credit card, but it is heavy." "It is a key," I said. "It is a key to a future where you never have to be like your father." I closed his fingers over it. "You hide this, Trey. You hide it in your best hiding spot. You do not show your mom. You definitely do not show your dad. If they find it, they will take it. Do you understand?" He nodded, sensing the gravity of the secret. "Keep it safe," I continued. "One day I will call you, or I will send for you. When I do, you bring this card. Until then, it is our secret. Can you keep a secret for Pop Pop?" "I promise," he whispered. "Good. Now go back inside. They will be looking for you. And Trey. Tomorrow, no matter what happens, no matter what noises you hear or what people say, you remember one thing. Pop Pop loves you, and Pop Pop did not leave you. I am just fixing the foundation." He hugged me tight. He smelled of soap and childhood innocence. I hugged him back, imprinting the feeling of him in my memory because I knew that after tomorrow I might not see him for a long time. "Go," I said gently. He slipped out the door and ran back toward the warmth of the house. I watched him go. He was the only thing I was leaving behind that had any value. I waited until the lights in the house began to go out one by one. The caterers left. The cleaning crew packed up their vans. Blake and Keisha went upstairs to the master bedroom, probably to dream about the money they thought they had secured with my signature. Silence fell over Maple Drive. I pulled out my burner phone. It was fully charged. I dialed Arthur Thorne. He answered on the first ring. He knew what night it was. Roosevelt Thorne said, "Are you safe?" "I am safe," I replied. "The question is the equipment ready?" "It is staged 3 miles out," Thorne confirmed. 3 Caterpillar excavators and a demolition crew of 12. They have the permits, they have the ownership documents, they have the disconnect orders for the utilities. "And the police?" I asked. "I spoke to the precinct captain personally," Thorne said. "He has seen the deed transfer. He knows Falcon Development Group is the legal owner of the property as of yesterday morning. He knows that any occupants currently in the dwelling are technically squatters. He has agreed to stand down and let the property owner exercise his rights to clear the land." "Good," I said. "What time?" Rosie Thorne asked. I looked at the house. I imagined the turkey in the oven. I imagined Blake's parents sitting at the dining table judging the silverware. I imagined Keisha trying to pour wine with a steady hand. "Noon," I said. 12 o'clock sharp. I want the first bucket to hit the front porch right as they sit down to eat. Are you sure? Thorne asked one last time. There is no going back after this. This is scorched earth. They put me in a shed, Arthur, I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. They forged my name. They stole my dignity. They tried to erase me. I paused. Sanctuary is closed. Flatten it. Understood, Thorne said. See you at noon. I hung up the phone. I lay back on the fertilizer bags and stared at the roof of the shed. It was my last night in this backyard. Tomorrow there would be no backyard. There would be no house. There would be no lies. There would only be truth. And truth is heavy. Truth is loud. Truth looks a lot like a wrecking ball. I closed my eyes and waited for the sun to rise on Thanksgiving Day, the day of gratitude. And I had a lot to be grateful for. I was grateful that I had the power to show them exactly who they had messed with. Let them sleep. Let them dream. The wake-up call was coming. It was 4 in the morning on Thanksgiving Day, and the world was wrapped in a thick gray fog that swallowed the streetlights and muted the sleeping city of Atlanta. The air was damp and cold, the kind of chill that seeps into the wood of old buildings and the bones of old men. Inside the tool shed, my breath came out in white puffs as I sat up on the stack of fertilizer bags that had been my bed for the last 3 nights. I did not feel the cold. My blood was running hot with the adrenaline of a man who is about to walk out of prison. I stood up and stripped off the flannel shirt and the stained denim overalls I had worn for the last week. I let them fall to the dirt floor in a heap. They were the costume of the confused, helpless grandfather my daughter thought she knew. They were the rags of the victim. I kicked them into the corner near a rusted lawnmower blade. I would never wear them again. I reached for the garment bag I had hidden behind a stack of plywood. I unzipped it slowly, the sound loud in the small space. Inside hung my armor. It was a bespoke charcoal gray suit hand-stitched by a tailor in Milan who knew my measurements better than my doctor knew my heart rate. The fabric was Super 150's wool, soft as butter and tough as steel. I dressed in the semi-darkness, guided by the muscle memory of a man who had worn suits like this for 30 years in boardrooms my son-in-law could not even get a janitorial job in. I buttoned the crisp white dress shirt, feeling the starch against my skin. I tied the silk tie in a perfect Windsor knot, the crimson fabric gleaming even in the dim light. I pulled on the socks made of Egyptian cotton. Finally, I slipped my feet into a pair of black alligator skin loafers that cost more than the car Blake drove to his failed job. I stood in the center of the shed and adjusted my cuffs. I reached into the pocket of the suit jacket and pulled out a gold pocket watch. It was not the cheap watch I wore around the house. This was a Patek Philippe, a gift from the board of directors of Falcon Development Group when we closed the deal on the Midtown skyscraper project. I checked the time. 4:15. Right on schedule. A low, powerful hum began to vibrate through the thin wooden walls of the shed. It was not the rattling engine of a garbage truck or the whine of a commuter car. It was a deep, throaty purr that signaled raw power wrapped in velvet. I opened the shed door. The fog swirled around the yard, obscuring the house where my daughter and her husband slept, dreaming of the money they thought they had stolen from me. I stepped out into the mist. There, idling in the alleyway behind the back fence, was a Phantom. A Rolls-Royce Phantom extended wheelbase painted a black so deep it looked like a hole in the universe. The Spirit of Ecstasy hood ornament caught the reflection of a distant streetlight glowing like a silver angel of vengeance. The rear door opened. A man stepped out. He was 6'2", built like a linebacker, wearing a black suit that fit him perfectly. It was Marcus, my head of security and personal driver for 20 years. He had parked the car silently, avoiding the gravel, professional to the core. He did not look at the dilapidated shed. He did not look at the muddy yard. He looked at me. He saw the suit. He saw the posture. He saw that Rosie the gardener was gone, and Mr. Jefferson the chairman had returned. "Good morning, sir," Marcus said, his voice low and respectful. "Good morning, Marcus," I replied. The air tasted different now. It tasted clean. I turned back to the shed for one final task. I walked to the workbench where I had eaten cold beans from a can just hours before. I pulled a thick, cream-colored envelope from my inside pocket. On the front, in bold, steady calligraphy, I had written a simple instruction. To Keisha, open when you are desperate. I propped the envelope up against a rusty can of paint thinner. It was the only thing in the shed that was clean. It stood out like a beacon. I knew she would find it. When the bulldozers came, when the reality of her choices crashed down on her, she would come running to the shed looking for her father. She would not find me. She would find this letter, and inside she would find the truth that would haunt her for the rest of her life. I turned away from the workbench. I stepped out of the shed and closed the door. I did not lock it. There was nothing left in there worth stealing. I walked across the frozen mud of the alleyway toward the car. Marcus held the rear suicide door open for me. The interior light spilled out, revealing acres of lamb's wool carpeting and polished walnut veneer. I stopped at the door. I felt a pull, a magnetic tug from the house behind me. It was the instinct of a father, the old habit of checking the locks, checking the windows, making sure the children were safe. I resisted it. I hardened my heart until it was as solid as the concrete foundations I used to pour. I did not look back at the house. I did not look at the window of the room where my grandson slept. I had given him the key to his future. The rest was up to fate. I ducked my head and slid into the back seat of the Rolls-Royce. The leather was soft and smelled of wealth and isolation. Marcus closed the door with a solid, heavy thud that sealed out the cold, the fog, and the betrayal. The silence inside the car was absolute. It was a sanctuary. "Where to, Mr. Jefferson?" Marcus asked, meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror. "Take me to the airfield, Marcus," I said, leaning back and crossing my legs. "The Gulf Stream is fueled and waiting. But first, stop at the 24-hour diner on Piedmont. I want a real cup of coffee." And Marcus, "Yes, sir. Drive slowly. I want to enjoy the ride." The car pulled away from the curb, gliding over the potholes of the alley as if they did not exist. We turned onto the main street, the headlights cutting a path through the fog. I watched the neighborhood pass by through the tinted glass. The houses were dark. The families inside were sleeping secure in their homes. My family was sleeping too. But they were sleeping inside a time bomb, and the timer had just ticked down to 0. I reached for the crystal decanter in the center console and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. I took a sip. It was cold and sharp. I was gone. Roosevelt, the burden, was gone. Roosevelt, the victim, was gone. The king had returned to his board. And he had just made his move. Checkmate. At 10 o'clock on Thanksgiving morning, the enemy breached the perimeter. They did not come with guns or tanks, but in a rented Lincoln town car that pulled into the driveway I had paved with my own sweat. I was miles away at 30,000 feet, sipping coffee in a leather armchair, but I knew the scene as intimately as if I were standing in the foyer. I had watched them prepare for this moment for weeks. I knew exactly how Blake would straighten his tie in the mirror, sweating through his undershirt. I knew how Keisha would check her makeup one last time, terrified that a single crack in her foundation would reveal the ruin beneath. The car doors opened and the Vanderbilts stepped out. Richard and Eleanor Vanderbilt. They were people who wore their judgment like expensive jewelry. Richard was a tall man with silver hair and a perpetual sneer, the kind of man who checks the hallmarks on silverware before he eats with it. Eleanor was thin, brittle, and draped in cashmere that cost more than my first truck. They stood on the walkway and surveyed the property. They looked at the landscaping I had planted. They looked at the brickwork I had laid. Blake rushed out to meet them, his arms wide, performing the role of the successful, self-made man. He hugged his mother, careful not to crush her silk scarf. He shook his father's hand with a firm, practiced grip, the grip of a man who makes deals, not a man who begs for loans to pay off gambling debts. "Welcome to our home," Blake boomed, his voice carrying across the lawn. "We are so glad you could make it down." Richard adjusted his glasses and looked up at the roof line. "It is a sturdy structure, Blake," he noted, his tone implying surprise that his son hadn't bought a shack. "Good lines, very traditional. I assume the neighborhood is stable. It is up and coming." Dad Blake lied smoothly. "Property values are skyrocketing. We got in at the perfect time." They walked inside their shoes, clicking on the hardwood floors I had sanded on my hands and knees. Keisha was waiting in the hallway, holding a tray of mimosas, smiling so hard her face must have hurt. "Mom, Dad, so good to see you," she chirped. Eleanor Vanderbilt looked at my daughter. She didn't see the woman who worked 2 jobs to support her son's fantasies. She saw an accessory. "The house looks lovely, Keisha." Eleanor said, her eyes darting to the corners of the ceiling looking for cobwebs. Very clean. Blake tells me you finally cleared out the clutter. Keisha stiffened. She knew what clutter meant. It meant me. Yes, Keisha said quickly. We did a big purge. We wanted everything perfect for your visit. Excellent, Richard said, taking a mimosa. Nothing worse than holding on to things that have outlived their usefulness. They moved into the living room, admiring the fireplace, the crown molding the built-in bookshelves. Blake took credit for every detail. He told them he chose the wood, he told them he designed the layout, he told them he paid for the renovations with his bonus. They nodded, impressed by the fiction, completely unaware that the architect, builder, and financier of their comfort was currently flying over the Carolinas, holding the detonator to their lives. While Blake poured drinks and spun tales of his stock market victories, Keisha glanced at the grandfather clock in the hall. It was 10:30. The schedule was tight. According to the plan she and Blake had whispered about in the dark, this was the window. While the guests were settling in with appetizers, she was supposed to slip out the back, retrieve the old man from the shed, and drive him to the nursing home before anyone noticed. She excused herself with a tight smile. I just need to check on the turkey, she lied. She walked into the kitchen, the smile dropping from her face like a mask. She grabbed her car keys from the counter. She smoothed her dress, took a deep breath, and opened the back door. The morning air was still biting cold. Keisha wrapped her arms around herself and hurried across the lawn toward the tool shed. She hated that shed. It was an eyesore. She had already promised Blake they would tear it down next spring and put in a gazebo. She reached the wooden door. It was closed. She paused, listening. She expected to hear the coughing of a sick old man or the shuffling of boots. She heard nothing. Dad, she hissed, tapping on the wood. Dad, it is time. Get your bag. We have to go. Silence. She frowned. She looked back at the house to make sure no one was watching from the windows. She pulled the latch and swung the door open. The shed was empty. Keisha stepped inside, blinking in the dim light. She saw the pile of fertilizer bags where I had slept. She saw the empty can of beans on the workbench. She saw the heap of dirty overalls in the corner looking like a shed skin. But there was no Roosevelt. Dad, she whispered, panic rising in her throat. She spun around, scanning the small space. He wasn't hiding behind the lawnmower. He wasn't in the corner. He was gone. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. This wasn't part of the plan. The old man was supposed to be waiting docile and defeated. He was supposed to be a package ready for delivery. Where could he go, she thought frantically. He is senile. He is confused. Then a terrifying thought gripped her. What if he wandered into the house? What if he walked through the front door right now wearing his dirty pajamas, babbling to Blake's parents? What if he told them he lived in the shed? It would ruin everything. The illusion of wealth, the facade of the happy family, it would all shatter instantly. She ran back out into the yard. She checked the side gate. It was latched. She checked the alleyway. Empty. She pulled out her phone and dialed my number. It went straight to voicemail. Damn it, Dad! She cursed, her fingers trembling. Pick up! She stood in the middle of the frozen lawn, torn between searching the neighborhood and rushing back inside to maintain the charade. If she left to look for me, Blake would be furious. If she stayed and I showed up, Blake would be destroyed. She ran back to the shed one last time, hoping she had just missed me. She kicked the pile of overalls. Nothing. She looked at the workbench again. She saw the rusty paint cans. She saw the old tools. In her panic, her eyes swept right over the cream-colored envelope propped against the thinner can. It was right there, plain as day, to Keisha. But fear makes people blind. She wasn't looking for a message. She was looking for a body. She was looking for a problem she needed to solve. She didn't see the letter. She only saw the absence. She ran back to the house, her heels sinking into the soft earth. She burst into the kitchen, breathless and pale. She leaned against the counter, trying to compose herself before returning to the living room. He is gone, she whispered to the empty room. The old fool is gone. She washed her hands, splashing cold water on her face. She forced the smile back onto her lips. She checked her reflection in the microwave. He probably wandered off to the park, she told herself. He will get lost. The police will find him. It is fine. It is better, actually. If the police find him wandering, it proves he is incompetent. It proves we were right to commit him. She straightened her dress. She took a deep breath. She grabbed a tray of stuffed mushrooms and walked back into the living room. Everything okay, darling? Eleanor Vanderbilt asked, looking up from her wine. Perfect, Keisha said, her voice trembling only slightly. Everything is absolutely perfect. The turkey is cooking beautifully. She looked at Blake. He winked at her, thinking the mission was accomplished, thinking the trash had been taken out. They sat there drinking their mimosas, surrounded by the warmth of the stolen house, celebrating their success. They didn't hear the rumble in the distance. They didn't hear the heavy diesel engines firing up 3 miles away. They didn't know that the clock was ticking down. 10:30. 90 minutes left. At 11:30 in the morning, the dining room of the house on Maple Drive looked like a centerfold from a high-end lifestyle magazine. The mahogany table, which I had refinished by hand 5 years ago, was covered in a lace tablecloth that Eleanor Vanderbilt had probably brought with her from Connecticut just to ensure the linens were up to her standards. In the center of the table sat a 20-pound turkey roasted to a golden brown, glistening under the light of the chandelier. Surrounding it were silver bowls filled with truffle mashed potatoes, glazed carrots, and stuffing made with artisan bread. It was a feast fit for royalty, paid for by the invisible labor of the man who was supposedly rotting in a nursing home. Richard Vanderbilt sat at the head of the table, adjusting his silk napkin on his lap. He looked around the room with a critical eye, nodding slowly as if he were an inspector finally signing off on a project. Eleanor sat opposite him, sipping her wine with a delicate pinky finger extended. To their right sat my grandson Trey, who looked small and miserable in a stiff button-down shirt. He was staring at his plate, his hand clutching something in his pocket. I knew what it was. It was the black titanium card. The weight of the secret was the only thing keeping him grounded. And then there were the hosts. Blake and Keisha sat across from each other, their smiles fixed and brittle. Blake was sweating. Beads of perspiration were gathering on his forehead, threatening to drip down onto his expensive suit. He kept glancing toward the hallway, toward the front door, toward the windows. Every creak of the house made him jump. He was terrified. He was waiting for the ghost of Roosevelt Jefferson to shamble in from the backyard, dirty and confused, to shatter the illusion he had built for his parents. Richard cleared his throat. The sound commanded immediate silence. He raised his crystal goblet filled with a vintage Cabernet that cost more than my weekly grocery bill. "I would like to propose a toast," Richard announced, his voice booming with the unearned confidence of old money. "To my son Blake." Blake straightened up, trying to look the part of the successful heir. "We are very proud of you, son," Richard continued. "It is not easy to make it in this economy. We know we have been hard on you in the past. We expected a lot. But looking around this beautiful home, seeing the stability you have built, the lifestyle you provide for your family, it is clear you have succeeded. You are a self-made man, Blake. You did not ask for handouts. You did not lean on anyone. You built this with your own vision and your own hard work." To Blake. "Hear, hear," Eleanor chimed in, clinking her glass against her husband's. To Blake, a true provider. Blake raised his glass, his hand trembling so badly the wine sloshed against the rim. "Thank you, Dad," he choked out. That means a lot, coming from you." He drank, gulping the wine down as if it were water. He needed the alcohol to numb the panic clawing at his throat. Self-made. The words must have tasted like ash in his mouth. He knew the truth. He knew he was drowning in debt. He knew the house belonged to his father-in-law. He knew he was a fraud. Keisha raised her glass too, but she did not drink. Her other hand was hidden beneath the table, clutching her smartphone. She was dialing my number for the 10th time in the last hour. I could imagine the sound of the voicemail buzzing in her ear. "Please leave a message." She ended the call and dialed again. Her panic was rising with every failed attempt. Where was the old man? Why wasn't he in the shed? If the police found him wandering the streets, they would bring him back here. A squad car pulling up during Thanksgiving dinner would be a disaster. Or worse, what if he had regained his senses? What if he walked into a bank? What if he called a lawyer? She looked across the table at Blake. His eyes met hers. They shared a moment of pure, terrified telepathy. They were trapped in their own lie, waiting for the inevitable collapse, but praying it would hold for just one more day. Just get through the turkey. Blake's eyes seemed to plead. Just get through the pie. Then we can find him. Then we can bury him. "Let us eat," Richard declared, picking up the carving knife and fork. "Blake, why don't you do the honors? Carve the bird for your family." Blake stood up, his legs shaky. He took the knife. He looked at the turkey. It probably looked like a judge to him. Suddenly, the water in the crystal glasses rippled. It was a small movement at first, a tiny concentric circle spreading from the center of the wine. Then the silverware rattled against the china plates. A low hum began to vibrate through the floorboards, traveling up through the legs of the table and into the bodies of the diners. Eleanor frowned, putting her glass down. "Is that thunder?" she asked, looking toward the window. The forecast said clear skies. Blake froze the knife, hovering over the turkey. He felt it. It was deep. It was heavy. It wasn't thunder. Thunder rolls and fades. This sound was constant. It was growing louder, a rhythmic, mechanical grinding that sounded like the earth itself was being chewed up. Keisha dropped her phone. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. She looked at the front window. The sheer curtains were trembling. "What on earth is that?" Richard demanded, annoyed by the interruption of his meal. "Is there road work happening on a holiday?" "Blake, you said this was a quiet neighborhood." I do not know," Blake stammered. "Maybe it is a truck, a delivery truck." The sound grew to a roar. It was the sound of massive diesel engines revving in unison. It was the sound of steel tracks crushing asphalt. It was the sound of raw, unbridled power. Then the light in the room changed. A shadow fell across the dining room window, blocking out the noon sun. It wasn't a cloud. It was something solid, something massive. Trey jumped up from his chair and ran to the window. He pulled back the curtains. "Cool," he shouted, his voice filled with the awe of a 10-year-old boy. "Dad, look. It is huge." Blake ran to the window. He looked out. His face went white. All the blood drained from his skin, leaving him looking like a corpse in a designer suit. Standing on the front lawn, crushing the prize-winning azaleas and tearing up the manicured grass, were three yellow monsters. Caterpillar 349 hydraulic excavators. Their massive steel arms were raised high in the air, their buckets gleaming in the sun like the claws of prehistoric beasts. Behind them, parked sideways to block the entire street, was a black limousine and a fleet of black SUVs. And standing on the front porch, right in front of the door, was a man in a black trench coat holding a megaphone. The roar of the engines idled down to a menacing thrum. The house was surrounded. The ground was still shaking. "Oh my God!" Eleanor shrieked, clutching her pearls. "Blake, what is happening? Who are those people?" Blake could not speak. He could not move. He recognized the logo on the side of the machines, Falcon Development Group, and then the amplified voice boomed through the front door, shaking the walls. "This is a final eviction notice," the voice announced, calm and professional. "The occupants of 1402 Maple Drive have exactly 30 minutes to vacate the premises. Demolition will commence at 12:30 sharp." Keisha screamed. It was a sound of pure terror. She looked at Blake. Blake looked at his father. Richard looked at the window, his mouth hanging open. The dinner was over. The turkey would never be eaten. The bill had come due, and the collectors had brought the heavy equipment. Blake threw open the front door with the desperate aggression of a man trying to regain control of a sinking ship. He marched onto the porch, intending to scream at a delivery driver or a lost contractor. What he found instead was a wall of black wool. 6 men in tailored suits stood in a semicircle on the porch steps. They looked like undertakers who had come to bury a giant. Behind them, the 3 massive yellow excavators idled with a menacing rumble, their diesel exhaust mixing with the crisp autumn air. The drivers sat in their cabs, hands on the levers, indifferent to the holiday, waiting for the signal to tear the roof off. At the center of the phalanx of lawyers stood Arthur Thorne. He did not look like a man who was there to negotiate. He held a leather briefcase in one hand and a stopwatch in the other. He checked the time, clicked the button on the watch, and looked up at Blake with eyes as cold as the Atlantic Ocean. "Can I help you?" Blake stammered, his voice shrinking in the face of such overwhelming force. He looked back at his parents, who had followed him to the doorway, their wine glasses still in their hands. "You are trespassing. This is private property. Get those machines off my lawn immediately, or I will call the police." Thorne did not blink. He stepped forward, his polished shoes crunching on the doormat. "Mr. Blake Anderson." Thorne said, his voice projecting clearly so that everyone, including the neighbors peering through their blinds, could hear. "I am Arthur Thorne, General Counsel for Falcon Development Group. I am not trespassing. I am the representative of the legal owner of this property." Blake laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound that bordered on hysteria. "Owner. I am the owner. Well, my wife and I, we live here. This is our home. You have the wrong address. Go away. Thorne opened his briefcase. He pulled out a document stamped with the official seal of the county clerk. This house located at 1402 Maple Drive was sold 7 days ago, Thorne stated calmly. The title was transferred, the deed was recorded, and the funds were cleared. The property now belongs to Falcon Development Group. We have a permit for immediate demolition to clear the site for commercial development. He held up the stopwatch. You have 29 minutes to remove your personal effects and vacate the premises. At 12:30, the structural walls come down. Behind Blake, Eleanor Vanderbilt gasped. Richard Vanderbilt stepped forward, his face turning a dark shade of red. "See here," Richard blustered. "This is ridiculous. My son owns this home. He is a successful broker. You cannot just roll up here on Thanksgiving and threaten to bulldoze a man's house. Who sold it to you? That is impossible." Thorne smiled. It was a shark smile. The seller was the sole legal owner of record Mr. Roosevelt Jefferson. Blake went white. He grabbed the doorframe to steady himself. "Rosie," he whispered. "No, that senile old fool." He couldn't. Then a spark of desperation lit up Blake's eyes. He remembered the paper. He remembered the signature in the kitchen 2 days ago. He thought he had the trump card. "You are lying," Blake shouted, pointing a finger at Thorne. "That old man is incompetent. He has dementia. And more importantly, I have power of attorney. He signed it over to us 2 days ago. I control his assets. Any sale he made is void because I did not authorize it." Blake turned to Keisha, who was cowering in the hallway. "Keisha, get the papers," Blake screamed. "Get the medical forms. Show him we own the old man." Keisha ran to the kitchen counter. She grabbed the clipboard with the insurance papers where I had scribbled my nonsense signature. She ran back and thrust them at Blake. "Here," Blake yelled, waving the papers in Thorne's face. "Look, durable power of attorney, signed by Roosevelt Jefferson. He gave us control. He cannot sell this house because we own him. You get your machines off my property or I will sue you for everything you have." Thorne took the clipboard. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at the document for less than 2 seconds. Then he started to laugh. It was a dry, dismissive sound that cut through Blake's bravado like a knife. "Mr. Anderson," Thorne said, handing the clipboard back as if it were contaminated. "Did you actually look at this document?" "Of course I did," Blake sputtered. "He signed it." "Look closer," Thorne commanded. Blake looked down at the paper. He looked at the jagged, looping scrawl on the signature line. "That is his signature," Blake insisted. "He is old." His hands shake. "That is not a signature," Thorne corrected him. "That is graffiti. And if you look very closely at the loops, Mr. Anderson, you will see that it does not spell Roosevelt Jefferson." Blake squinted. He brought the paper up to his nose. His eyes widened. He traced the lines with his finger. "I-K-N-O-W... I know," Blake whispered. Thorne nodded. "Precisely. He knew. He knew you were trying to steal from him. He knew you were trying to commit him. And he knew that this document would be legally worthless in any court in Georgia. Roosevelt Jefferson did not sign away his rights, Mr. Anderson. He played you." Blake dropped the clipboard. The papers scattered across the porch, fluttering in the wind. "But the deed," Blake stammered, his reality fracturing. "We have lived here for 5 years. He promised it to us. He promised you shelter." Thorne said, his voice hardening. "He did not promise you ownership. And since you forged his signature on a $400,000 loan application with a predatory lender putting his property at risk, he decided to liquidate the asset before you could lose it for him." Richard Vanderbilt made a choking sound. "Forged," he repeated, looking at his son with horror. "Predatory lender. Blake, what is he talking about? You said the bonus paid for the renovations. You said the firm was booming." Blake shrank under his father's gaze. He looked like a child caught stealing from the collection plate. "Dad, it is a lie," Blake whined. "They are lying." "I have the affidavit from the lender right here," Thorne said, pulling another paper from his briefcase. "And I have the police report filed this morning regarding the identity theft and mortgage fraud." Thorne looked at his stopwatch again. 25 minutes, Mr. Anderson. The excavators are very expensive to operate. We do not like to keep them idling." Keisha started to cry. It was a thin, high wail of absolute despair. "Where is he?" she sobbed. "Where is my father?" Thorne looked at her. His expression softened just a fraction, but his eyes remained steel. Mr. Jefferson is currently in an undisclosed location enjoying his retirement. He wanted me to tell you that he hopes you enjoy your lunch. He also mentioned that the shed in the backyard is excluded from the demolition order, so if you need a place to store your things, you might start there. But we have guests, Eleanor Vanderbilt shrieked. We have a turkey. Thorne signaled to the foreman in the lead excavator. The machine revved its engine, a black cloud of smoke pumping into the air. The giant steel bucket slammed into the ground, shaking the porch. Madam Thorne said over the noise, I suggest you take the turkey to go. Blake looked at the machines. He looked at the lawyers. He looked at his parents, who were looking at him with a mixture of confusion and dawning revulsion. It is over, Blake whispered. He turned and ran back into the house, pushing past his parents. Grab the silver, he screamed at Keisha. Grab the jewelry. Grab anything you can carry. The Vanderbilts stood on the porch, frozen in the wreckage of their son's lies. Thorne checked his watch. 24 minutes, he announced to the empty doorway. He turned his back on the house and walked down the steps, straightening his tie. The demolition was about to begin. The chaos on the front lawn was a symphony of destruction that I conducted from 2,000 miles away. Inside the house, the panic was absolute. Blake was running back and forth from the living room to his car, his arms full of silverware and electronics, looking like a looter in his own home. He dropped a silver platter on the driveway, and it rang out with a discordant clang that was lost beneath the idle roar of the 3 Caterpillar excavators. His parents, Richard and Eleanor Vanderbilt, stood by the crushed azalea bushes, clutching each other as if they were witnessing the apocalypse. They watched their son, the self-proclaimed titan of industry, scrambling in the mud to save a flat-screen television. Their faces were masks of horror and confusion. They were realizing that the narrative of success they had been fed was a lie, and the reality was a foreclosure carried out by heavy machinery. In the center of this hurricane stood my daughter, Keisha. She was not running. She was not packing. She was frozen. She stood on the bottom step of the porch, her arms wrapped around herself, shaking violently. She looked at the machines, then at her husband, then at the empty driveway where my old truck used to be. Her eyes were wide and vacant. She was in shock. The world she had built on the foundation of my sacrifice had just liquefied beneath her feet. Arthur Thorne watched the scene with the dispassionate gaze of a man who had overseen hostile takeovers and corporate liquidations. He checked his stopwatch. 15 minutes remained. He signaled to one of his junior associates, a young woman in a sharp blazer who was holding a tablet case. She nodded and handed him an iPad Pro. Thorne walked through the mayhem, stepping over the dropped silver platter without breaking stride. He approached Keisha. He did not offer her a tissue. He did not offer her comfort. He offered her a screen. Mrs. Anderson Thorne said, his voice cutting through the noise of the engines. There is someone who wishes to speak with you. It is a matter of some urgency regarding the transition of the property. Keisha blinked, looking at him as if he were speaking a foreign language. Who? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Thorne did not answer. He simply held the iPad up to her face. The screen was black for a second, reflecting her own terrified, tear-streaked face. Then the connection stabilized. The pixels flared to life. The image that filled the high-definition screen was so bright, so vibrant that Keisha had to squint. It was a window into another world. The background was a deep, impossible blue. It was the color of the Caribbean Sea meeting a cloudless sky. The sun was shining with a brilliance that made the gray November day in Atlanta look like a black and white photograph. In the foreground, sitting on the white leather deck of a private yacht, was a man. He was not wearing dirty denim overalls. He was not covered in grease or dust. He was wearing a linen suit the color of oatmeal, tailored to perfection, with a silk pocket square that fluttered gently in the ocean breeze. On his wrist sat the gold Patek Philippe watch that caught the sunlight. In his hand he held a crystal flute of vintage champagne, the condensation beating on the glass. Keisha leaned in her breath, hitching in her throat. She recognized the eyes. They were the only thing that remained of the father she thought she knew. But the rest of him was a stranger. This was not Rosie the gardener. This was Roosevelt Jefferson, the majority shareholder. This was the man who signed the checks. Dad, she gasped, reaching out to touch the screen but pulling her hand back as if it were hot. Dad, where are you? The police are looking for you. We thought you were lost. We thought you were dead. I took a sip of champagne, letting the bubbles burst on my tongue. I looked into the camera lens, looking directly into her eyes across the digital divide. I did not smile. I did not frown. I looked at her with the serene detachment of a judge delivering a verdict. "Hello, Keisha," I said. My voice came through the iPad speakers clear and crisp, silencing the nearby conversation of the Vanderbilt parents who had leaned in to see who was on the screen. "I am not lost daughter," I continued, "and I am certainly not dead. I am currently anchored off the coast of St. Bart's. I decided that the winter in Georgia was bad for my joints, and the atmosphere in my house was bad for my soul. So I decided to take an early retirement." Keisha stared at me, her mouth opening and closing. She looked at the yacht. She looked at the suit. She looked at the peace in my face. "But the money," she stammered. "The house." Blake said we owned everything. "You signed the papers. You are confused. You need to come home. We can fix this." I laughed. It was a rich, deep sound that had not been heard in that house for years. "There is nothing to fix, Keisha," I said. "And I am not confused. In fact, I have never been more lucid. I did not sign your papers. I signed a warning. You just did not read it because you were too busy counting money that did not belong to you." I leaned forward, bringing my face closer to the camera. The sunlight cast shadows across my face, making me look like a carving of stone. "You wanted me out, Keisha. You wanted to erase me. You wanted to put me in a warehouse so you could impress people who do not care about you. You wanted to turn my home into a stage for your vanity. Well, congratulations. You got your wish. I am gone." "But Dad, the house," she wailed, gesturing to the excavators behind her. "They are going to tear it down. Blake says they bought it. You have to tell them to stop. It is our home." "It was never your home," I corrected her, my voice hardening. "It was my home. It was the home I built for your mother. It was the home where I raised you. You were a guest. And you were a bad guest. You disrespected the host. You tried to steal the furniture. And you tried to bury the landlord." I took another sip of champagne. "And regarding the demolition," I said, "I cannot stop it. I would not stop it even if I could. I sold it to Falcon Development Group. I believe you know their reputation. They are very efficient." Blake ran up to Keisha, then panting, sweating, holding a box of watches. He looked at the screen. He saw me. He saw the yacht. His eyes almost popped out of his head. "Rosie," he shouted. "What is this? Is that a boat? Where did you get a boat? Tell these people to leave. Tell them I have power of attorney." I looked at Blake. I looked at the man who had called me a stray. "Hello, Blake," I said. "I see you met Mr. Thorne. He is a very good lawyer. He handles all my personal assets, including the 15% stake I hold in the company that just bought this property." Blake froze. 15%, he whispered. "Falcon. You are Falcon." "Silent partner," I said. "For 30 years. I built the office you work in, Blake. I own the mortgage on the building your firm leases. I have been signing your paychecks indirectly for a decade, and you treated me like a servant." I checked my watch. The Patek Philippe glinted in the sun. 12:25, I noted. "You have 5 minutes left." I looked back at Keisha. She was crying now, silent tears of total devastation. "Oh, and Keisha," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, but only to sharpen the blade. "That shed in the backyard, the one you made me sleep in, the one where you sent me to freeze while you drank wine with your husband." She nodded, sobbing. "I gave specific instructions to the foreman," I said. "It is the first thing to go. I want it flattened first. I want to watch it splinter, because no father should ever have to sleep in the dirt while his daughter sleeps in silk." The video feed flickered as the satellite connection adjusted. "Goodbye, Keisha," I said. "Enjoy the holiday. I hear the turkey is delicious this time of year." I tapped the screen and ended the call. The iPad went black in Keisha's hands. She stared at her reflection in the dark glass. Behind her, the engine of the lead excavator roared to life, the hydraulic arm lifting high into the air, ready to strike the first blow against the shed where I had left my final letter. The deadline had arrived. The time for talk was over. Now it was time for dust. The video feed cut out, leaving the iPad screen black and glossy, reflecting the ruin on Keisha's face. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the idle rumble of the diesel engines waiting for the command to strike. But the real explosion had already happened. It had detonated right in the middle of the driveway, destroying the facade Blake Anderson had spent 5 years constructing. Richard Vanderbilt was the first to move. He turned slowly toward his son. His face, usually composed in an expression of aristocratic boredom, was now twisted into a rictus of pure fury. He looked at the house, then at the lawyers, then at the machines, and finally at Blake. He did not see a successful broker anymore. He saw a parasite. "You lied to us," Richard said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that made Blake flinch as if he had been struck. "You told us you bought this house. You told us you were a partner at the firm. You told us you were handling the renovations." Blake scrambled backward, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of defense. "Dad, listen. It is complicated. Rosie is confused. He is senile. He doesn't know what he is saying. That was a deep fake. You know how technology is these days. He isn't on a yacht. He is probably in a motel room using a green screen." Arthur Thorne stepped forward. He did not need to shout. He just held up a single piece of paper. "Mr. Vanderbilt," Thorne said, addressing the father, "this is the police report filed this morning for forgery and identity theft. Your son forged Mr. Jefferson's signature to secure a high-risk loan from a predatory lender. He has not made a trade at his firm in 6 months. He is insolvent. And as of this moment, he is trespassing on private corporate property." Richard snatched the paper from Thorne's hand. He read it in 3 seconds. He crumbled it in his fist and threw it at Blake's chest. "You forged a signature." Richard spat the words out like poison. "You act like a criminal. You live like a squatter in another man's house, and you parade us around here like trophies. You made us accomplices to your fraud." Eleanor Vanderbilt was trembling. She looked at the muddy lawn. She looked at her Italian shoes sinking into the dirt. She looked at Keisha, who was staring at the ground. "We bragged about you," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling with humiliation. "We told the club members you were a prodigy. We told them you were a real estate mogul, and you are nothing but a grifter living in your father-in-law's basement." "Mom, please," Blake begged, reaching for her arm. "I just needed a little more time. The market is turning. I can fix this. I just need a bridge loan. If you could just loan me $50,000, I can pay off the shark and we can sue Rosie for the house." Richard laughed. It was a harsh barking sound. "A loan," Richard roared. "You want a loan? You just lost your inheritance, Blake. Do you hear me? You are cut off. The trust is frozen, effective immediately. I am not throwing good money into a black hole. You want to be a big shot. You figure it out." Richard grabbed Eleanor's arm. "Come on, Eleanor. We are leaving. I will not stay another second in this sham." "But—" "The turkey," Eleanor wailed, looking at the house. "Leave it," Richard commanded. "We are going to the airport." They walked to their rental car, stepping over the silver platter Blake had dropped earlier. They got in and slammed the doors. They did not look back. They reversed down the driveway, nearly hitting one of the black SUVs, and sped away down the street. Blake stood alone in the driveway. His safety net was gone. His audience was gone. His lies were stripped away, leaving him naked and shivering in the cold November wind. He looked at the house he had pretended to own. He looked at the wife he had dragged into his deception. Keisha was not looking at him. Her eyes were fixed on something else. She was staring past the house, past the porch, past the lawyers. She was staring at the backyard. The foreman of the demolition crew leaned out of his cab. He looked at Thorne. "Mr. Thorne," the foreman shouted over the engine noise, "we are clear to proceed." The owner wanted the outbuilding down first. He pointed the hydraulic arm toward the shed. Keisha's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide. The words I had spoken on the iPad echoed in her mind. That shed in the backyard. I left a letter. She remembered. She remembered rushing into the shed earlier, looking for me and finding nothing but dust. But she had been panicked then. She had been blind. Now, with the world collapsing around her, my voice was the only thing that felt real. "Wait!" Keisha screamed. She broke into a run. She shoved past Blake, who was staring blankly at the asphalt. She ran past Thorne, who watched her with mild interest. She ran around the side of the house, her heels digging into the soft earth, ruining her shoes, tearing her stockings. "Stop!" she yelled at the excavator operator. "Stop!" The massive machine was already pivoting its tracks, churning up the grass. The arm was extending the steel bucket, poised like a hammer over the fragile wooden roof of the tool shed. Keisha threw herself at the shed door. She yanked it open. It swung wide, banging against the siding. She threw herself inside, falling onto her knees in the dirt. She scanned the room frantically. The fertilizer bags, the old rags, the rusty tools. There, propped against a can of paint thinner sitting on the workbench in a beam of dusty light, was the cream-colored envelope. To Keisha. Open When you are desperate. She grabbed it. Her fingers tore at the heavy paper. She scrambled backward out of the shed just as the shadow of the excavator bucket fell over the doorway. She rolled onto the grass, clutching the letter to her chest. Behind her, with a sound like a thunderclap, the steel bucket smashed into the roof of the shed. Wood splintered, glass shattered. The structure collapsed in a cloud of dust and debris, flattening the space where I had slept for 4 nights. Keisha did not look back. She sat in the wet grass, gasping for breath, and pulled the contents of the envelope out. There were 2 documents. The first was a bank statement. But it was not mine. It was Blake's. It was a statement from a hidden account in the Cayman Islands. It showed transfers, thousands of dollars, money that should have gone to rent, money that should have gone to bills, money that I had secretly given them to help them survive. But the transfers were not going to debt collectors. They were going to a woman named Veronica Miller, living in Buckhead. Keisha flipped to the second document. It was a paternity test result. The probability of paternity was 99.9%. The child was a 3-year-old boy. The father was Blake Anderson. Keisha felt the air leave her lungs. The world tilted on its axis. He wasn't just broke. He wasn't just a liar. He was cheating. He had a whole other family. He had been taking the money I gave them, the money she worked 2 jobs for, and he was funneling it to a mistress and a secret child in the most expensive district in the city. He had made her evict her own father. He had made her humiliate me. He had made her sleep in a house built on fraud, all to protect a life he was living with someone else. She stood up. She held the papers in her hand like a weapon. She walked back around the house. Blake was standing by the porch arguing with Thorne, trying to buy more time. He looked up and saw Keisha. He saw the dust on her dress. He saw the tear in her stockings. And then he saw the papers in her hand. His face, which had been pale, went gray. He recognized the bank logo. Keisha Blake started taking a step toward her. "Honey, listen. Whatever you found, we can explain it. Rosie is trying to divide us. He is manipulating you." Keisha stopped 3 feet from him. She did not scream. She did not cry. She looked at him with the cold, dead eyes of a woman who realizes she has murdered her own soul for a counterfeit coin. "You have a son," she said. Her voice was flat dead. Blake froze. "How did you—" "Rosie hacked my files. That is illegal." "Keisha, that is inadmissible. You have a son," she repeated louder, "in Buckhead. You spent $40,000 on an apartment for her last year. That was my dad's money. That was my salary." Blake looked around wildly, looking for an escape route. "It was a mistake. It happened before we were serious. I was just trying to fix it. I was trying to pay her off so she would not bother us. I did it for us, Keisha. I did it to protect our family. To protect us!" Keisha screamed, throwing the papers in his face. "You made me throw my father in a shed to protect your mistress. You made me sign those papers to protect your secret. You aren't broke, Blake. You are just spending our money on another life." She lunged at him. She clawed at his face. Blake stumbled back, tripping over his own feet and falling onto the driveway into the mud. "Get away from me!" Keisha shrieked. "Get away! I hate you! I hate you!" She fell to her knees in the driveway, sobbing uncontrollably. The papers fluttered around her, settling in the mud like dead leaves. The DNA test, the bank statement, the proof of her complete and total foolishness. Thorne watched the scene with a grim expression. He checked his watch. 12:30, Thorne announced. He signaled the lead excavator. The engine roared. The machine turned away from the ruins of the shed and faced the house I built, the house where Keisha took her first steps, the house where Beatrice died. The steel teeth of the bucket bit into the roof of the front porch. Wood groaned. Shingles flew. The entire front of the house sheared away, exposing the living room like a dollhouse. The festive table, the roast turkey, the crystal glasses. It was all exposed to the cold daylight. Keisha looked up. She saw her home being eaten alive. She saw Blake crawling backward in the mud, trying to get away from her. She saw the lawyers watching impassively. She was alone. She had no father. She had no husband. She had no home. She screamed a long, tearing sound of absolute regret, but her voice was lost beneath the roar of the engines and the sound of 40 years of history crashing down into a pile of rubble. The destruction of 1402 Maple Drive was not a tragedy. It was a correction. The lead excavator swung its massive yellow arm and the steel bucket crashed through the roof of the master bedroom. The sound was like a bomb going off. Wood splintered and glass exploded outward in a glittering shower. The walls I had framed with my own hands 30 years ago buckled and collapsed, sending a plume of drywall dust into the cold November air. I watched on the screen as the second machine drove straight through the bay window of the living room. It plowed over the expensive furniture Blake had bought on credit. It crushed the dining table where 10 minutes ago they had been toasting to their own lies. The 20-pound golden turkey rolled off the table and was instantly flattened under a steel track, grinding it into the dirt along with the Persian rug. Blake Anderson stood in the driveway watching his kingdom turn to rubble. He looked small. He looked pathetic. He was covered in mud, his suit ruined his face, a mask of absolute disbelief. He turned to run to get to his car to escape the nightmare he had created, but he did not make it 3 steps. A siren wailed, cutting through the mechanical roar of the demolition. 2 police cruisers screeched to a halt at the curb, blocking the exit. Officers swarmed out, their hands on their holsters. Arthur Thorne stepped forward, pointing a finger directly at Blake. "That is him," Thorne said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "That is the man who forged the loan documents." Blake froze. He looked at the officers, then at Thorne, then at the ruins of the house. He tried to speak, but only a strangled sob came out. The officers grabbed him. They spun him around and slammed him against the hood of the black SUV. The click of the handcuffs was audible even over the sound of the crushing timber. "You have the wrong guy," Blake screamed as they shoved him into the back of the squad car. "My father-in-law told me to do it. He is the one you want. He is crazy. He set me up. Nobody listened." The door slammed shut, sealing him inside his new reality. He was going to spend Thanksgiving in a holding cell and the next 10 years explaining to a judge why he stole a house from an old man. Keisha did not look at her husband. She did not move to help him. She stood in the middle of the yard, her heels broken, her dress torn, surrounded by the debris of her childhood home. She watched the excavator tear down the wall of her old bedroom. She saw her life disintegrate. She had no husband. He was a criminal and a cheater with a secret family. She had no father. She had betrayed him, and he had vanished. She had no home. It was being loaded into dump trucks right before her eyes. She fell to her knees in the dirt, clutching the DNA test and the bank statement to her chest. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. She was a statue of regret, sitting in the wreckage of her own greed. The dust from the house settled on her hair, turning it gray, making her look like the old woman she had tried to discard. I watched it all from the deck of the yacht. The feed cut out as the local news crews arrived to film the spectacle, but I had seen enough. I closed the iPad and handed it to Marcus, who was standing nearby holding a fresh bottle of champagne. "It is done," Marcus said softly. "It is done," I replied. I stood up and walked to the railing of the boat. The Caribbean Ocean stretched out before me, endless and blue. The water was clear, so different from the muddy red clay of Georgia. The air was warm, smelling of salt and freedom. "They thought I was just an old man," I said, speaking to the wind and the waves. They looked at my gray hair and my slow walk, and they saw weakness. They saw a resource to be mined until it was empty. They forgot who I am. I looked down at my hands. They were manicured now, no longer stained with grease, but the strength was still there. I built that life from nothing. I continued, my voice gaining strength. I mixed the mortar, I laid the bricks, I wired the lights. I created a world for them where they could be safe and warm, and because I built it, I had the right to tear it down. I took a sip of the cold champagne. They wanted a Thanksgiving dinner. They wanted to show off. They wanted to pretend they were kings and queens while I ate beans in a shed. Well, they got a show. They got a lesson in structural engineering. If the foundation is rotten, the house must come down. I thought about Keisha sitting in the dirt. I felt a flicker of sadness, but I crushed it. She had made her choice. She chose the husband who called me a stray. She chose the nursing home. She chose the betrayal. "I am not cruel," I whispered. "I am just a contractor, and when a building is condemned, you do not paint it, you bulldoze it." I put on my sunglasses, blocking out the glare of the tropical sun. I looked at the horizon. I was 73 years old. I had millions of dollars in the bank. I had my health. And for the first time in 40 years, I had no one to take care of but myself. "This Thanksgiving, I am not thankful for the turkey," I said, raising my glass to the empty ocean. "I am not thankful for the family that tried to bury me. I am thankful for the clarity. I am thankful that I woke up before the dirt hit the coffin lid." I turned to the captain, who was waiting in the bridge. "Captain," I called out. "Yes, Mr. Jefferson," the captain replied. "Full throttle," I said. "Let us see what is over the horizon. I am done looking back." The engines of the yacht roared to life, a deep, powerful sound that vibrated through the deck. The bow rose, cutting through the waves, leaving a white wake behind us. I watched the island of St. Bart's recede into the distance. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sweet air of survival. My name is Roosevelt Jefferson. I am a builder, I am a father, and I am a free man. And as for the rubble on Maple Drive, let the weeds have it. I have new things to build. The yacht sped up, racing toward the sun, leaving the ruins of the past far behind in the wake of my own liberation. Happy Thanksgiving indeed. They say blood is thicker than water, but I learned that greed is an acid that dissolves even the strongest bonds. My daughter and her husband made the fatal mistake of valuing my net worth over my self-worth. They saw an old man and assumed weakness. They saw silence and assumed submission. They forgot that the architect knows exactly where the structural weaknesses are. The lesson here is brutal but necessary. Never disrespect the hands that built your life. You can only push a good man so far before he stops building bridges and starts demolishing them. Dignity is non-negotiable. If you believe in this kind of justice, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of truth and retribution. Tell me in the comments, did I go too far, or did they get exactly what they deserved?